Hey guys, do you recall in the Discord when I announced a few weeks back that I was sick? Yeah, I recorded a whole bunch of this video like a half day before the sickness fully hit, and I think my throat might have been strained or something during it. Certainly sounds like it. Anyway, I'm too lazy to re-record this whole thing, and this story is already really late, so whatever. Let's go! Back at the beginning of the year, the centre-right British newspaper, The Telegraph, published an article written by their arts correspondent, a Mr. Craig Simpson. Its title is very straightforward: The Prevent video game that treats every teenager like a far-right extremist. Youngsters threatened with referral to anti-terror program if they question migration while playing. The article goes into detail about a government-funded video game called Pathways, meant to be a de-radicalization educational tool for the British school system. It's still a mystery to me as to why this article was published when it was, on January 9th, 2026. By the article's own admission, this topic isn't exactly recent. Pathways was developed in 2023, at the request of the city councils of East Yorkshire and Hull, so it's not like it's the hot new story or anything like that. Looking over Simpson's social media presence and his publishing output on The Telegraph shows that he drops an article every few days. So maybe it was a slow news day over at The Telegraph. And in the absence of anything more interesting, as well as having a quota to hit, he dug through his backlog of minor stories, looking for something worthy enough to print. Who knows? What we do know, though, is that after the article was published, over the next few hours, the Pathways story hit the radar of the online UK-based dissident right. The account Bovril G on Twitter was the first to take notice of the story, a couple of hours after the article was published, but not solely because it was a government-funded propaganda game. That, on the face of it, does sound like it has the potential to be completely ridiculous. But no, what actually caught Bovril G's eye was the character of Amelia in the game. Amelia looks like an alt girl at first glance. You know, purple dyed hair, bang haircut, makeup, black choker. These types of people are politically usually pretty progressive, but Amelia isn't. Throughout the Pathways game, Amelia expresses not progressive political positions, but reactionary ones, standing up for traditional British values and against mass immigration. Or at least that's what Bovril G claimed. Soon after, many people began to ask him for the source of what he was playing. He happily provided it to everyone, and the story quickly caught on like wildfire. A government-funded anti-radicalization video game where the character expressing the wrong political views is not only right-wing, but a trendy, attractive, dyed-hair, college-aged art hoe? Sign me up! That's what pretty much everyone said. Soon enough, the character of Amelia became the right-wing internet's main focus. She was the character the game's developers intended for the player to be opposed to, not identify with. And yet, she ended up being the breakaway fan favorite. Amelia has become the internet's latest waifu. There's tons of photoshops, fan art, AI-generated images, all of Amelia waving the British flag, standing up for British values, and wanting immigrants deported from the UK. As a result of Amelia's popularity, I've seen VTubers make Amelia models. I've seen game developers announce Amelia dating sims. I've seen trailers for a fake Amelia anime.
ねえ、チャーリー。イギリスのこと。好き？
どうして行かないなんて言ったんだろう。君はただ僕らの未来を送ってくれていたのに。
行こう。世界を変えに。
残念ね、チャーリー君。そんな有害な考えを持っているなんて更生施設に入ってもらうわね。許されることではないの。
あのアメリアって子はまったく悪影響なんだよ。
You know, I'd totally watch this. I've seen people make Amelia songs and music videos, though I'm pretty sure that most of these are also AI generated, and honestly, they're pretty cringe.
A noble title the crown gave you, but a knight should be brave and strong. How could they honor you like this? How could they be so wrong?
Jesus Christ, this might be some of the worst AI slop I've ever seen in my life. This shit is reason enough to go full anti-clanker. Except A Million Amelias. That one's pretty fire sometimes.
Amelia, Amelia, a pearl in the wire, the red flag who fan the flames of the fire, the ones who remember the pride but dawn, the footy on Saturdays and the long gone.
And yes, I've seen Rule 34. I'm not going to show you it because fuck you. I do actually value not completely nuking my channel off the internet. But the funniest one that I've seen is border checkpoints guarding entry. if you know what I mean. As funny as all of this Amelia posting is, we should probably actually check out the Pathways game for ourselves. After all, if you don't hang out on the right-wing side of the internet, it's probably the case that this entire meme arc passed you by. A lot of anti-woke or explicitly right-wing YouTubers played through this game on stream in order to laugh at how ridiculous it is. And since Pathways is nominally a game, and I am a gamer, I'll give it a quick once-over, just so we're all on the same page. Is Pathways really as one-sided as the online rightoids claim? Let's see. Oh my god, I think I'm already beginning to regret this, and we haven't even started yet. This is Pathways, though its full title is Pathways, Navigating Gaming, the Internet, and Extremism, a browser-based video game, and I'm using heavy air quotes there if you can't hear it in my voice. Funded in part by the British government, and created by Shoutout UK, which is an anti-extremist activist group. Graphically, the game is pure boomer corpo slop. The controller on the title screen looks like if you asked a 70-year-old man who has no idea what modern video games even are to make a video game controller. It's shaped like the SNES controller, but instead of a D-pad, it's got a fucking arcade joystick. The characters are all in that corporate Memphis art style that you see a fair bit of nowadays. You know, with no lines or shadows whatsoever, only flat colors, designed to be maximally inclusive through minimalism. Occasionally, the character art moves in such a way revealing the seams between their constituent parts, showing that not much actual care was put into this thing. I've never really liked this art style, and it's just all around ugly. Sound? Well, there's no music. The only audio this game features is a narrator who reads the on-screen text, and I guess she does a fine enough job, but it's nothing to write home about.
Somebody else in the class tells Charlie that this is proof that immigrants are coming to the UK and taking our jobs.
They took our jobs!
The game does allow you to choose either a male or a female character at the start, but this only changes the avatar on screen and nothing else. This is most noticeable if you play through the game multiple times, if for some reason you thought that hammering nails into your dick wasn't torturous enough for your taste, because no matter which character you choose, the voiceover is the same. Your character's name is always Charlie. They always go by they/them pronouns. I'm sure that some people want to chalk this up to wokeness or whatever, but I'm more inclined to believe it was to cut down on the amount of lines the narrator had to record. That's one way to save a buck, make everything gender neutral.
They, them, energy. They, them, energy.
What about the gameplay? Well, the game opens with, welcome to Pathways, an interactive game where you determine your journey. In this game, you will have to choose between certain options that can lead to different outcomes. Let's see where your path takes you. And all of this is just a blatant lie. This isn't actually a game where you determine your journey, or where different options lead to different outcomes. This isn't even an on-rails experience with the illusion of choice, like a Telltale game, or Phoenix Wright or something. But no, they don't even go that far. Like I said earlier, this is a series of cutscenes with 5 dialogue options, all of which lead to the same ending. And let's check out how. The instruction screen explains that you're about to experience scenarios like hearing something racist while gaming, or watching an edgy social media video, and you have to choose your reaction to the event. These choices determine the route your character takes. Be aware of getting trapped in risky or harmful situations, or else you'll get involved in extremism or radicalization, damaging the outcome for your character. Wow.
Wow.
This damage is represented by a bar in the corner of the screen, but it doesn't actually behave like a health bar, more like an alignment meter. As you choose more radicalizing options, the meter tilts towards red, and less towards green. Or at least, that's what the game wants you to think. This meter doesn't actually do anything.
It's a fake.
If you choose a more radicalizing option, the game shows an animation sliding the meter from the center to the red. But by the next question, the meter is back in the center again. The game isn't actually keeping track of anything here, it's just playing an animation. In much the same vein, the game shows this chapter select screen, with a new scene becoming unlocked after you complete a previous one. But this isn't actually a functional chapter select screen. You can't go back and play a previous chapter again, not without refreshing the browser. This menu appears in between scenes, but it's entirely cosmetic. It's made to look like you're playing a video game, even though you're actually not. This is an HR slideshow using the trappings of a video game.
Nii-chan, let's play Smash Bros. Wait a minute. This isn't Super Smash Bros. This is insects!
But the main reason people are talking about this game right now is because of the story, and let's get into it. You choose your character, Charlie, Charlie, and the game begins. We're playing a Minecraft ripoff with some college friends when we end up getting linked to a new website containing some dodgy posts. One of them asked us to download a video. Now, I figured we'd be watching it, not downloading it, but this game was made by boomers after all. The choices we have are A. Tell a trusted adult, B. Talk to the stranger online to find out more about the video, or C. Download the video. And fuck it, why not? Let's download it. The game frames this as us giving into peer pressure or something, when it's far more likely that we'd simply be curious about what's going on. However, here's where we stumble onto a fundamental problem with this game's writing. Choosing to download the video has us not only watch it ourselves, but also spread it around the internet. As a general rule, there's always exceptions, but most of the time, a choice-based game like this only works if you can count on what you're choosing to actually be accurate. The option said download the video, not download the video and spread it to all your Discord friends, like your account just got fucking hacked. In any case, we spread the video around and feel great about it, because I guess we're a parasocial simp, and then the game tells us that downloading or streaming certain content might be illegal under the UK's terrorism laws. Holy shit, guys, what was actually in that video? That leads us into chapter 2. Yes, these things are literally like 2 minutes long, where we're walking to school the next day and nervous about getting back a project. Unfortunately, we got 60%, while our classmate got 80%, as well as a job offer. Come on, game, you don't gotta rub it in. Charlie is pretty pissed about this, and I think the creators made the classmate brown-skinned, specifically to bring up the specter of racism and DEI hires here. And this is when the character of Amelia enters the game. And Bovril G's initial characterization of her seems to be correct. She is in fact a purple-haired, choker-wearing, progressive-coded art hoe after all. And yet she's also talking about immigrants coming to the UK and taking our jobs. I still kinda can't believe this ended up being true. Why is the lefty college activist out here dropping anti-immigrant talking points? What the fuck, dude? So, of course we want to impress our new lady friend, so we once again choose C, agreeing with Amelia and exploring her ideas further. In case it's not obvious yet, by the way, for each of these questions, A is always the good route, B is always neutral, and C is always bad. But fuck it, we've got a baddie to get with. We're going C all the way, boys! However, choosing C causes us to launch into a racist tirade right in the middle of class, attracting everyone's attention, including the teacher. Dude, what the fuck, can you at least save the slurs for 4chan? Oh, check out Amelia though, dude, she's into it. The teacher ends up throwing us out of class for the rest of the week, which is absolutely how you de-radicalize a racist, guys. Isolate them from their friends and force them to retreat into the online world. That'll do it. The third scenario opens with us bed-rotting all day scrolling on the phone. Yeah, me too, buddy. When we discover a video showing that Muslim men are stealing British war veterans' housing, and we gotta take back control of our country. Option C says, engage directly with the post. This seems unfair. And you know what? It does seem unfair. The game characterizes Charlie's outrage as a patriotic service by standing up for veterans and white rights. But unfortunately for them, Charlie was engaging with, illegal groups. Now listen, I'm not a Britbonger, but what do you mean by illegal groups? Like if you post under this Facebook page, you'll get charged or whatever? Are these groups illegal in the real world? Like there's some terrorist organization or something? Or is even just talking to these people online considered to be illegal? After all, the UK's hate speech laws and the way they monitor the internet can be kind of crazy sometimes.
So you're under arrest, so you're going to Harrogate, unfortunately.
You're taking me to Harrogate in the middle of the night over a tweet?
I am, unfortunately.
There's no time to answer that question, though. We're on to scenario 4. We're sitting down to eat dinner with the family when our phone goes off at the table. Instead of the proper response, which is mom laying down the law and insisting on no phones during dinner, we check in anyway to discover that Amelia has uploaded a video to her social media of her attending an anti-immigrant protest. You know, I can see why the internet's latched onto this chick. Amelia invites us to join a secret group over on Alt Tech called Action for Britain, whose emblem is a fucking skull on a shield. That's a bit on the nose there, game. And of course, we're still trying to get into her pants, so it's C all the way, baby! There's only one problem here, though. Why the fuck is Amelia anti-gamer? What the fuck is this? Is this the game designers discovering that they made the antagonist of the story into the most likable character, so they had to give her some quality to make gamers hate her or something? The game says that our mom is now getting suspicious of us. But fuck you, mom, I'm a college student. I'm an adult now. If I want to fuck the Nazi art hoe, that's my right.
And now back to more kids who are out of control on the Mary Poppins Show.
Mary, I am out of control. Yeah, I use drugs. I can do what I want, bitch. Yeah, I have sex and I don't use protection. It's my hot body. I'll do what I want.
Scenario 5 opens with us on a date with Amelia. We're in, bros. Charlie reveals that their parents are divorced. Dad lives in a separate city, and they're gonna go visit on the weekend. That's why he wasn't at the dinner table with mom and whoever this is. Sister, aunt, lesbian lover? The game never says. Amelia immediately tells us that there's another protest in Dad's city that we should attend, consisting of people who are angry at the changes Britain's been through during recent years, and the erosion of British values. Also, for some reason, the city's being firebombed. Maybe this is Keir Starmer's response to the protest. Eager to make our new GF happy, we decide to attend the protest. And holy shit, Charlie, are you making fascist banners? It's two swords crossed. The previous icon was a skull and a shield, and the Totenkopf isn't exclusively a fascist symbol, though it is used by fascists. But this one literally just reminds you of the Strasserite banner, that left-wing faction of the Nazi Party that used a sword and a hammer to represent the merger of the workers of socialism with the militancy of nationalism.
Are we the baddies?
Oh shit, the pigs are here! Run, Charlie, run! The final scenario doesn't even feature a choice. It's simply a roundup of what's transpired. Charlie is sitting in class by themselves. I guess Amelia didn't really like the fact that we were caught by the fuzz. Oh well. Thinking about all the choices that they've made over the last few weeks. And it's been a few weeks, I guess? I don't know. See, I thought maybe each scenario was one day, since, like, for example, No Mercy, another meme game that I played through in a different video, each chapter took place on a single day, and the whole game took place over the course of a week. And that idea just has some nice symmetry to it. And Pathways even has that kind of feel on the fake chapter select screen. For example, day 1 is Sunday, Minecraft Day. Day 2 is Monday, going back to school for the week. And day 6 is Friday, the end of the school week. Things are winding down. But then again, maybe I am expecting too much from this piece of shit. As class lets out for the day, the teacher stays behind with Charlie to discuss the ideology they've been engaging with. And then the game cuts to this very strange scene. Charlie is clearly still in the classroom, but she's looking at her own laptop, which says to her, click to find out which support Charlie could have received if they had chosen to engage with the harmful ideology. Bitch, I did engage! I went to a protest, I got questioned by the cops, I was doing everything I could to get into that hot ethno-Nat's pants. What do you mean, if I had chosen to engage? Anyway, the game ends with Charlie agreeing that they need help. She was referred to the Prevent program, where she took diversity courses to learn about racism and shit. She went to a therapist, where it turns out that it was actually the fact that her parents divorced that made her prone to radicalization. And eventually a mentor was assigned to her by an old white boomer and a Muslim lady, who helped her rekindle her love of video games once again, after that evil Amelia had snuffed it out. And then the game plays an unskippable 10-minute cutscene describing what the Prevent program is. And unlike the rest of the game, clicking anywhere during this sequence pauses it, and there's nothing you can do but sit and listen. How wonderful. By the way, in real life, the Prevent program is literally just a de-radicalization program, where you get therapies and mentors, and get pulled out of the alt-right pipeline or whatever. We'll have more to say about it later on. When it comes to the game though, no matter what choices you make during your playthrough, the game always reaches the same final scene. The teacher approaches Charlie, tells them they're not in trouble for their encounters with this new ideology, and then refers them to the Prevent program. It doesn't matter if you chose all good, all bad, all mid, or any combination thereof. The game drops you into the same ending with little change. The only difference is the amount of help that you get. Going all bad means you get the maximum amount of intervention, with counseling and a mentor. Going all good still has you get referred to Prevent though. You just do a little bit of counseling instead. However, I did notice when collecting footage for this video that some of this stuff was bugged out. I quickly did a run where I chose the bad route for the first 4 choices, and then good for the 5th. The game didn't know what to do with this. It just kinda refused to give me an ending. Hey, congratulations Mass Effect 3 for finally getting dethroned from the #1 spot for a game featuring player choices that just breaks when you play it in a way the developer didn't intend. Good job.
Thanks, I guess.
Whether the developers intended this or not, the story of Pathways seems to be saying that even benign encounters with right-wing anti-immigration sentiment is so destabilizing to the psyche that individuals always need counseling for it, even if they were only exposed to it for a little bit and they completely disagreed with it. Everyone needs to be put back on the politically correct path by the system. Because, like I've been saying this whole time, it's not actually a game, it's an HR slideshow presentation.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture.
Now, the individual choices themselves do lead to different scenes. For example, if you choose not to download the video during the first day, Charlie will talk to Mom about it instead. This doesn't actually change anything in future scenes though, because there's no continuity between the episodes. Nothing is actually being tracked by the game. Probably the most striking example of this lack of continuity is the fact that you can completely reject everything Amelia wants you to do, leading to her and her friends shitting on you at the end of day 4. And nonetheless, you still end up at the coffee shop with her on day 5. Also, hold on, Amelia's friends? Isn't that brown chick literally the same person Amelia badmouthed to us back on day 2, claiming she had come to Britain to take our job? Why the fuck is Amelia friends with her? Why would she side with Amelia, given she's the target of Amelia's racism? Was this just a mistake? Like, were they too lazy to make another character, and they just reused this one? Come on, guys, if you're making a product like this, you have to have at least a minimum amount of respect for your own continuity. Moreover, a lot of the middle-of-the-road choices also end up leading to scenes the game paints as negative. For example, if you choose Day 5's neutral option, observing the protests from a distance, you get basically the same outcome as the bad option. Charlie doesn't make her own two swords banner, but they do happily inform Amelia that they'll attend, and they do get wrapped up with police, even though we specifically chose not to engage.
Why would she's basically viewed a post, which is not an arrestable offence.
The only thing is
that
we need to seize the phone at this current moment.
Yeah.
The phone needs to get seized from us, otherwise we will escalate this further.
Yeah.
Which means your daughter will get arrested.
For what? Viewing a social media post?
But probably the most egregious example is on Day 3, while you're doom scrolling in bed. When Charlie encounters the viral video of Muslim refugees taking space from British veterans, if you decide to find out more about the topic online, Charlie ends up doing research. She reads papers, she discovers statistics, and she watches protests regarding the Great Replacement theory, and all this information is coming from illegal groups. What is the game actually saying here? That doing your own research will lead you to the wrong conclusion, so don't do it? Just believe what you're told? I mean, that can be true. Facebook is full of retarded old boomers who do their own research and believe in the wackiest shit imaginable. But is remaining in total ignorance and trusting whatever's fed to you by the authorities any better? Obviously not. The good path for this option, by the way, has Charlie scroll on by and then discover another video showing that the British veteran actually got housing in another location. So I guess that solves that. There's no problem here, even though in reality, these issues are far more complex. And if the game's point is don't trust what goes viral, which is a good point, by the way, why should we suddenly trust this viral clip? Is it because it reinforces the progressive narrative on this issue? It turns out the message of this game isn't actually don't trust what goes viral. It's don't trust anything that isn't politically progressive, which, by the way, is a terrible message. When you engage with content online, you should be developing the tools and skills to determine whether or not it's true, regardless of whose politics it's good for. And the idea that you should trust the mainstream because it's progressive, or it's good, or it's politically correct, is just as toxic a mindset as trusting alternative sources because they don't come from the establishment. Neither of these ways of viewing the world will actually lead you to the truth. And that ultimately is the problem with Pathways. It's a progressive propaganda piece designed by boomers in the UK to try and push kids into becoming progressives themselves, rather than actually teaching them the ability to discover what is true. And of course, this isn't going to work because kids nowadays know more about video games and the internet and online culture than the boomers ever will. Do you think sitting down someone like Sneeko or Clavicular and forcing them to play Pathways would have prevented their descent into retardation and degeneracy? Obviously not. Anyway, for what it's worth, that was Pathways, the UK's de-radicalization propaganda game. I can't believe I wasted several of my ever-dwindling stockpile of hours left on this earth on this nonsense.
What have I done?
So, it would seem that the online right's initial reaction to the Amelia character, that she's a reactionary right-winger with the aesthetics of a progressive left-winger making her highly appealing, is actually correct. Per the actual content of the game, she is in fact a goth-adjacent alt-girl with dyed hair and a choker who wants to deport the immigrants, making it no surprise to me why the internet latched onto her. As a result, Pathways briefly became the discourse on social media, the next node in the online gaming culture war. The story went through the same cycle of consumption that others had before it, like Forspoken, or Dustborn, or Assassin's Creed Shadows, or any other of these flash-in-the-pan viral events. We can actually map out the life cycle of these pretty accurately at this point. They go through 3 identifiable stages. 1, the initial inciting event that quickly grabs everyone's attention, generally by going viral on Twitter. 2, the rapid proliferation of memes, propelled by humor rather than accuracy. And 3, just as the inaccuracies build up, as the factual errors in the story compound, it comes to the end of its life cycle. Before anybody can even notice that they were wrong about anything, the internet has already moved on to the next big thing.
Before, you're living in the past, Marge. Quit living in the past.
And Pathways is no different in this regard. For example, despite the initial article making it very clear that the Pathways game has been around since 2023, a ton of rightoids who hopped onto this story were talking about it like it had just been put out or something. People began playing the game, posting screenshots of ridiculous or stupid moments on Twitter, laughing at how ham-fisted the game is, and about how they're going to choose every right-wing option to stick it to the man. By January 14th, people began to notice that the Pathways site was no longer working, and everyone assumed the government shut down the game because they were getting laughed at and they were desperate to save face. And then, with the game being vanquished from the internet, the anti-woke crowd claimed another win in the culture war, and everyone largely moved on. However, this is all incorrect. Now, to be fair, these sound like pretty inconsequential errors. Don't actually matter all that much. But here's the thing about small errors. If you collect enough of them, they can actually compound into some pretty large ones down the line. Let me show you what I mean. This game massively blew up, in part due to Amelia herself, but also due to the fact that the story of the game fits neatly into a wider cultural narrative that the right wing tells itself about the establishment, even if that narrative isn't exactly true. And here's how that story generally goes. The government is totalitarian, bureaucratic, and left-leaning, while the people desire liberty, they're common sense focused, and they're right-leaning. As a result, the government is regularly trying to propagandize the people into its ideology using the powers of the state. But the homegrown culture of the people, which represents the true soul of the nation, allows them to easily reroute around government narratives, usually by employing humor. Each of these tiny pieces of the story, like the claim that Pathways is a new initiative, rather than something that stuck around unchallenged for years, adds a little bit of texture to the overall narrative, despite being provably false. Look, the Internet Archive shows the game existed at least as far back as September 2025. Google Cache has an image of the game from June 2024. It probably got a few uses here and there, as British school teachers had their classes play it or something, but for the most part, nobody cared. As a result of the Telegraph article covering Pathways, and Bovril G's viral tweets about Amelia, the game massively blew up, and the site received so much traffic that it temporarily went offline. After all, it's a tiny site, and they probably didn't have the bandwidth available for this many people playing the game all at once. And now that the internet's moved on from the story, the game can actually be played again. Go to the URL right now. It's in the description. The game's still up. This story that the game was clowned on so hard the government took it down in shame is simply not true. But people think that it's true because it fits into a wider constructed narrative of the common person being based and red-pilled, while the state is far left, overbearing, but ultimately highly concerned with optics. So when the normies clown on something like Pathways, the government panics and quickly takes it down to save face. That's a funny story, it's an entertaining story, but it's not a true story. For example, V put out this video, UK forced to delete its own propaganda game, which is just blatantly incorrect.
Well, jokes aside, do you know that the government actually banned this video game? So if you don't know who Amelia is, the government made a extremely poor quality visual novel that I already played on my other channel. And I assume that because it was so poor quality, it probably costed a couple of £100,000 to make. And I genuinely want to get to the bottom of it, like how much money did the propaganda game from the UK cost the taxpayer? Because this seems to be like a question that no one is asking. But more importantly, because Amelia was so popular and started to trend, and everyone identified with the waifu, the British government decided to take it down. So again, the question is like, is anyone getting fired over this? Like, imagine, you know, like taxpayer money taken away. Someone worked really hard and that money couldn't go to his children, couldn't go to his family. It had to be taken away and to be paid by some people that work for the government in order to make a video game that actually people enjoyed, but because they enjoyed it for the wrong reasons, the video was now taken down.
No, V, that's not what fucking happened. But this is the kind of content you make when you rush out a hot take before actually understanding all the facts. It turns out that pattern recognition doesn't hold up to actually uncovering what is true.
I'm kind of retarded.
And now that the anti-woke scene has moved on to clowning on High Guard or whatever, there's not a single look back to notice that they were wrong, that Pathways is still around. The only thing that matters to them is that in the moment, they felt like they claimed a win in the culture war, even if the win wasn't true. And frankly, even if the culture war wasn't true either. In fact, let's make a game out of this. Why not? It can't be worse than the other game we've played today. Here's the million-dollar question. When the anti-wokies talk about people getting triggered over Amelia memes, who are they talking about? Any guesses? Was it the progressive game journos that came to the defense of this incredible piece of gaming artistry? Most of them didn't even notice something was going on. Kotaku talked about it briefly, but only did so to agree with everyone else, saying the game was a failure at de-radicalizing anyone, and clearly the creators had never met a teenage boy before. Okay, it wasn't the journos. Any other answers? Was the government menacingly shaking its fist at the internet for making them look like laughingstocks? Also no. In reality, I'm not sure the boomers who wanted this game made even noticed that it was temporarily offline. What about the progressive rank and file over on TikTok? Once again, thinking back to the collective shout versus no mercy drama, in that story, it was pretty easy to point at the actual camps of people involved. You had the free speech, pro-porn, pro-gamer people coming to the defense of Zerat Games, and then you had a ton of progressive creators over on TikTok posting short videos about how disgusting No Mercy was, and how it had to be taken down. There was an actual argument happening between the two factions, with real people who had different visions of how the world ought to be, criticizing each other's perspectives. The way that the anti-woke types are talking about this story, it sounds like it should be much the same. So surely we'll find defenders of Pathways over on TikTok, right? Well, it turns out, no. This story doesn't have much traction over there at all. Only a handful of accounts are talking about it, and they're overwhelmingly taking up the anti-immigration perspective in the conversation. There are no defenders of the game here, as far as I can see. Oh, but there are accounts repeating the false story of the UK government took down pathways out of embarrassment, or whatever.
In a stunning case of government overreach gone wrong, the UK Home Office has quietly disabled its controversial Pathways, Navigating the Internet and Extremism interactive game. Funded through the Prevent program to steer teens away from so-called far-right radicalization.
Radicalization? Okay, fuck you. I'm calling for a full moratorium on AI-generated TikToks. If you can't be arsed to make your own fucking content, you're useless. Anyway, my point is, when the anti-woke YouTubers said stuff like, LOL, I bet they're so mad at us now, they were pretty much just shadowboxing. Like, as an example, let's check out this guy here, Will of the Fans. I've seen him around a few times before. He seems friendly enough, but check out his video. Amelia is the hero the UK deserves, and the state hates it. Oh really? Is the state coping and seething? Or is this just quasi-libertarian clickbait?
Because in the absolute moral, cultural and institutional wreckage that is Britain in 2026, the state managed to do something spectacularly stupid. It tried to use a piece of interactive propaganda to shame young people out of loving their own country.
This guy is massively overstating his case. Like, you just saw me play through the whole game in this video. And while there's absolutely some pretty retarded shit in there, never does the game actually say, how dare you love the UK? This is one of the core problems with the anti-woke crowd. They do their so-called pattern recognizing so hard, they start generating patterns that aren't even there. And we'll see more examples of him doing that in a bit.
But the internet looked at what the state was calling evil and immediately recognized something else entirely. Confidence, clarity, attachment, defiance. And the speed with which this happened tells you something terrifying about the people in charge. They genuinely thought this was going to work. They genuinely believed they could reprogram patriotism out of the population using a cartoon, a dialogue tree, and a handful of buzzwords approved by a civil service committee. They believed the public was passive, malleable, ashamed enough to comply. They were wrong.
Well, I mean, as we've already seen, the speed of this unfolding was actually quite slow. Pathways has been around for years after all. But once again, this fits the anti-woke narrative of the people rising up in rebellion and rejecting the government's propaganda and internet denizens running circles around the state, when the actual situation is far more nuanced. In fact, this Will guy is kind of the living straw man of the anti-woke position. He makes every conspiratorial leap in logic that, if I claimed was happening but didn't show proof, you might think I was acting in bad faith. But I can literally just use his words. For example,
the problem is the global managerial ideology that now governs Western institutions. This ideology doesn't call itself socialist, it doesn't call itself authoritarian. It calls itself evidence-based, stakeholder-driven, post-political. Of course, it is actually socialist and authoritarian. It insists there are no alternatives, only processes. It believes society is something to be managed, not argued with. Optimized, not inspired. National identity, that's friction. Democratic disagreement, that's inefficient. Cultural attachment, that's a risk variable. This worldview is perfectly encapsulated by organizations like the World Economic Forum, or the WEF for short, whose language reveals everything if you bother to read it carefully. Stakeholder capitalism, behavioral nudging, resilience frameworks, managed transitions. These are not neutral phrases. They sound benign, but they describe a system in which power is removed from voters and redistributed to institutions, NGOs, and transnational bodies that are accountable to no one. And once governments internalize this framework, citizens stop being participants. They become inputs. Stop me if this sounds dystopian, but, well, actually there is no stopping it now, it's well underway.
Hold on, bro. If you genuinely believe there's no stopping whatever it is you think's going on, why do you even try to frame yourself as a part of the based resistance? Could it be that all of this stuff, the epic music, the conspiratorial rambling, it's all just part of a cringe YouTube aesthetic meant to grift some money off the culture warriors? Alright, his logic here, as I understand it, is that the globalist technocrats, who are simultaneously big capitalist corporate types and also big government communist types, using various multinational institutions like the WEF, are trying very hard to get the nations and peoples of the world under their thumb in order to harmonize and control and manage everyone. And this agenda trickles all the way down to even relatively minor stories. Like, for example, a cringe propaganda slideshow disguised as a video game. Like Klaus fucking Schwab is calling his plants up on the Hull City Council and demanding they make pathways. If I had said that's what the anti-woke people believe, without being able to point at one of them saying it, I'd probably sound insane. Of course, he doesn't stop here. I just wanted to split his yapping up with some yapping of my own.
Globalism in its modern form is not about cooperation. It is just about standardization. Different cultures are messy. They produce disagreement. They resist harmonization. National pride creates loyalty that then competes with supranatural governance. So pride must be softened, then stigmatized, then reframed as dangerous. That's why Pathways treats Amelia's views as a threat, because if people feel rooted in place, history, culture, they are harder to manage. And management, not representation, is the true goal.
Like, yes, I get there are many critiques of globalism out there. Some of them are even good. But socialism, neoliberalism, globalism, these are different ideologies with different goals. They're not all the same thing just because you don't like them. The real world is actually a lot more complicated than what this guy is presenting here. It's far more likely that, rather than the WEF issuing marching orders down the chain to shut out UK, telling them to propagandize the British youth, the people in Shut Out UK genuinely believe in the values they're putting forward themselves, independent of any worldwide agenda that may or may not exist. Like, listen to this.
We see the same pattern everywhere. Entertainment franchises hollowed out by ideological committees, games redesigned to lecture rather than engage, media that talks at audiences instead of trusting them, celebrities that think we give a goddamn what they think about absolutely anything, institutions that explain failure as moral resistance. This is what happens when socialism sheds its revolutionary aesthetics and puts on a lanyard. Modern technocratic socialism doesn't promise utopia. It promises management, a slow, polite decline explained with graphs, and the public is increasingly rejecting it. About bloody time. Not with manifestos, but with disengagement, mockery, and cultural sabotage. And here's the uncomfortable part. The future everyone warned you about? We're already living in it, baby. A generation raised by screens, attention fractured by design, identity outsourced to algorithms. Kids don't play games, they watch streamers play them. They don't build worlds, they consume dopamine loops. Skill is replaced by skeptical, mastery by monetization. And then the same institutions that engineered this environment now pretend to be shocked by the results. They warn about attention spans that they helped to destroy. They scold audiences they tried to disengage. And instead of correcting course, they double down. And the cracks are showing. Trust in institutions is collapsing. Viewership is collapsing. Engagement is collapsing. And the response is always the same. Perhaps you've noticed it with Doctor Who or Star Trek. Blame the audience. Pathetic. That is not leadership, that's just decay. When insiders start quietly admitting that something went wrong, it's not courage, it's a lifetime too late.
Did you notice that he roped in a whole bunch of different conversations into this one, and just kinda ignored any inconsistencies and contradictions and making them all come from the same source? The idea of a unified theory explaining all of humanity's problems is actually a really attractive one.
Okay, Charlie, I'm gonna have to stop you right there.
Actual socialists, they fall for that siren song all the time. To them, everything is the problem of capitalism, even though in reality the world's far more complicated, and the problems we face do not actually come from one source. And anti-woke guys like this make the same mistake. Most of the shit he listed off doesn't actually come from the same source. It's not actually the same problem. But everything just kinda feels better if you can somehow pretend there's one big villain that can be conquered, and then humanity will finally be saved. Whether that villain is the capitalists, or the corporations, or the state, or the WEF, or the Jews, or whoever. All in all, while Pathways may be a ham-fisted attempt at progressive propaganda, this idea of nanny state middle manager employees sitting at their desks, raging and pulling their hair out because their game's getting laughed at online, that's just not fucking happening, dude. In reality, most people who worked on this game, again back in 2023, have probably moved on to other things. And those few people who work in government who might actually know about this controversy, they probably don't care. This narrative of the Pathways game going viral, and the British government desperately trying to contain it, but they can't stop the true voice of the people, and the UK Parliament is coping and seething, and how the population is based and red-pilled. It's a narrative that is repeated regularly on the right, but it's also just not true. Now, does this mean that Pathways had no defenders whatsoever? Oh no, there absolutely were a couple of left-leaning idiots stupid enough to try their hand at that fool's game. And talking about them is an excellent segue into the actual issue with Amelia. So let's cover that next. Even though the game journals didn't defend this shit, and the social media progressives didn't defend this shit, you know who did actually defend it? LBC, Leading Britain's Conversation, a left-leaning radio talk show in the UK. And they covered the Amelia story on the January 26th, 2026 episode of their broadcast. Let's see what they had to say about it.
Amelia is an AI purple-haired goth girl originally created for an anti-extremism computer game generated by the Home Office, but now an increasingly outspoken, anti-Muslim, flag-waving so-called English patriot. She has become very popular, and here she is in action.
Hi, I'm Amelia. I'm English, and I love England. I like having fish and chips and a pint at the local pub. I like Shakespeare and Dickens, Tolkien and Lewis, Harry Potter. I like pork sausage and dogs and fashion.
There's a bit more to her than pork sausage. Let's talk now to Will Guyatt, LBC's technology correspondent. Will, this is the first time I can remember a really popular, I mean, in this case, very clearly sort of right-wing or far-right figure being generated by AI and just going viral online.
Yeah, evening, Andrew. And what's incredible about this is the fact that it was first created for Prevent, to stop extremism, and it was designed for a sort of small-scale experiment in Yorkshire. But this character has essentially been taken over, and it's staggering that how quickly this has proliferated across the internet. The middle of last week, from nothing at the start of January, there were 12,000 posts involving this character in one day. So people are now rapidly generating this character, putting it into AI videos, putting it into all the kind of right-wing tropes, challenging about pork, sausages, and all sorts of things with racist stereotypes. But the other thing that's perhaps most damning about this is Elon Musk himself has now retweeted an account which has created a cryptocurrency behind this particular meme. So you can now get an Amelia coin, because let's face it, right-wingers need another cryptocurrency. But Elon Musk is now promoting that. And this is monetizing hate. This is one of the clearest examples we've ever had of somebody trying to make money out of right-wing hatred. And okay, we get hatred from all sides on the internet, but this is very clear where this is coming from. And the AI account, for example, Andrew suggests is English. I'm of high confidence those videos did not originate in England. They were made outside of the country as disruptive tactics through deepfakes and other technology.
Well, it just makes me think. I spend my time analysing the language used by, Robert Jenrick or Keir Starmer or whatever. Perhaps we're all completely behind the times. In other words, the language we should be looking at is the language created by entirely fictional AI avatars.
It's worrying, but I think we may be at a stage where this stuff is proliferating so heavily on the internet that has to be given some kind of consideration. And it's not just X, that's not the only platform where this stuff proliferates, but when the boss of that platform is retweeting an account using a meme and promoting a cryptocurrency, thereby, hopefully making people money on the back of this, we're in a very, very strange place when it comes to attitudes and how our social networks are being used.
I'd say a dark place as well, and something that we really have to pay more attention to.
A few things right off the bat here. One, this LBC segment constituted the most that anybody on the broadly left-leaning side of the conversation was actually willing to go to bat for Pathways, with the exception of the game's creator, which you may have noticed I've been talking around this whole video. We'll get to them later. 2, I agree the Amelia coin shit is cringe as fuck, fair enough. Hey, you like Amelia, right? She's best girl, right? Well, give the sweaty neckbeard pretending to be her all your cash. Buy Amelia coin now! In fact, the vast majority of Pathways content on TikTok is actually just from one account heavily pushing buying Amelia coin as the solution to the immigrant problem. These grifters are fucking shameless. 3, it really sounds like the only criticism they can muster up is that a lot of Amelia content actually comes from outside the UK. Well, yeah, bro. The internet is a global public square, for better or worse. And people living in other countries do have the right to comment on UK issues. And this works both ways. On US issues too, you whining cucks. And 4. Everything else they had to say about this topic really just boils down to it's racist and it's far right, and therefore it's bad. Okay, I don't necessarily disagree, but that on its own isn't an argument. We are past the point where you can simply point at a thing you don't like, call it right-wing, and expect people to accept that. You actually have to build out why it's bad, and these guys utterly failed at that task. So hopefully we can all agree that LBC's limp-wristed attempt to defend pathways isn't really worth much. But this was it. I played the LBC section in its entirety, sorry for the long clip, specifically because that segment of their show constitutes like 90% of the internet's pro-pathways content. Almost nobody was sticking up for this garbage. Just for completionist's sake, let's quickly check out the only other so-called pathways defender, the official YouTube account of St. Edward's School, which is a UK-based school for special needs kids. Alright, let's see why these guys of all people are weighing in on this.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I want to talk about something you may have seen on your feeds recently, the Amelia meme, and why it links really closely to Safer Internet Day on the 10th of February.
3, 2, 1, talk to me. Hi, I'm Amelia. I'm English, and I love England.
First things first, Amelia isn't a real person.
Hey buddy, don't tell some of the Amelia posters. They're not ready to know the truth yet.
She started as a fictional AI-generated character created for an educational project that was meant to help young people spot extremist or misleading ideas online.
Well, that's just obviously true.
Now, the short clips and images have been taken out of context and shared on social media with the character being turned into a meme.
While it's true that she's been turned into a meme, what do you mean taken out of context? The context is the game, and the meme accurately depicts the character as presented.
People began using her face and voice to push strong opinions, misleading information, and one-sided views. And because it looks and sounds real, lots of people have believed it. This is where AI becomes powerful and risky. AI can now create realistic faces, voices, and videos in seconds. That means misinformation doesn't always look fake anymore.
I don't think anyone's actually believed it, man. Like, I made that joke about Amelia posters a minute ago, but do you really think that they think Amelia is a flesh and blood real person? Like, was anybody actually fooled by these AI videos into believing they actually happened? Probably not.
It can sound confident, polished, and convincing, even when it's completely wrong. And that's why we've been talking about how AI should be used responsibly. AI can be brilliant for learning and creativity, but when it's used to influence opinions or divide people, there's a problem.
This is all true, sure, but not relevant to the Amelia conversation. You'd have to be an actual retard to think that Amelia— oh. Yeah, everything this video actually has to say is just true. Don't trust what goes viral. Don't trust engagement bait. Be on the lookout for posts that are specifically meant to manipulate your emotions. The issue is that they decided to hitch this message onto the latest internet meme when it didn't really fit. This video was poorly planned out, but it's not a defense of pathways, in the same way as that animated soy golem over on LBC tried to pearl clutch about Amelia being hijacked by the far right. And yet, the anti-woke crowd still acted like it was. Like, for example, I watched Smash JT's segment on this topic. Unlike the other anti-woke dudes we looked at in this video, Smash is genuinely a friendly guy, even if we disagree politically. But here's what he had to say about this.
And they are going to try to defend their position, indoctrinate the youth, and double down on the right-wing extremists.
And it's just like, no, man, that's not what fucking happened. Did we watch the same video? This was a cringe, out-of-touch soy-lennial working for one school, trying and failing to relate to whatever the kids are talking about. This is not the British government desperately trying to save face or whatever.
This, by the way, they are being paid by the government to push this propaganda. Their paycheck is coming from the government.
How could you possibly know this? Are you just assuming that because it's a school, it has to be government funded, and therefore the government is directing what they upload to their YouTube page or something? Well, a quick Google search reveals that St. Edward's School in Hampshire is actually a private boarding school, meaning that government money isn't actually the primary source of revenue, like it is with, say, the American public school system. Parents pay the school directly for their kids to attend.
Gang using her face and voice to push strong opinions, misleading information, and what
you used her to push strong opinions in the other direction in your game.
AI can be brilliant for learning and creativity, but when it's used to influence opinions or divide people, there's a problem.
Hold the phone! What were you doing with your educational video game, bro? How is AI any different than that? At all?
Opinions or divide people, there's a problem.
There's a problem, according to this guy. So they are the moral arbiter of truth, the authority on what is right and what is wrong. And he wants to take the standpoint of, if you are doing something that he does not approve of, it's illegal. It's so wrong that you should feel bad about it and not fall for internet propaganda. Coming from the guy behind putting the game together to push propaganda on the internet.
This guy wasn't involved in the creation of the game. This school wasn't involved in the creation of the game. Smash is falling into the same trap as the others here, acting like everyone that you oppose is a part of a monolithic block, rather than being members of their own groups and factions with their own agendas, which don't always align all the time.
First, pause before you share. If a post makes you feel angry, shocked, or like everyone needs to see this right now, that's often a sign it's trying to manipulate emotions.
Please put the fire out. Please stop sharing these memes. If it makes you feel passionate and it makes you feel proud of your country, pause, because that could be a bad thing for reasons.
Second, verify before trusting. Check who made the video. Are they an expert or just a meme account looking for...
Again, he's trying to put himself in the position of, I will tell you who's a good authority, who's a legitimate account, and who's not. Like, we would trust this guy.
That's not what's happening here, man. He's saying that if a post makes you feel outraged, take a second and think, is this reasonable? Or is somebody manipulating me? If a source comes from a dodgy account, don't just share it because it aligns with your views. Think about it first. Try and see if it's actually true. This is all completely reasonable advice. You are not immune to propaganda. Doubly so if the propaganda's funny. I don't like digging in on Smash like this. I've had several good talks with him in the past, but like, every video he drops on this topic is kinda cut from the same cloth as that Will of the Fans guy. Overly clickbaity thumbnails and headlines with messages that massively overstate the case. Holy crap, Amelia just accidentally exposed the entire WEF conspiracy. The UK government shames citizens for supporting Amelia. Horrific. Amelia exposes UK kid terrorism ad scandal. These videos have almost no connection to Amelia, by the way. I hate it when the game journals do the clickbait title shit. I think it's corrosive to good discourse, and I'd be a hypocrite if I let Smash off the hook for it just because I like the guy personally. Doing this might be good for your channel and your pocketbook, but it's bad for the wider discussion.
Disappointed!
I've watched so many anti-woke online personalities who came into their own back in like 2023, 2024, completely descend down rabbit holes of retardation. I know this is a bit of a side tangent, but my message to the few anti-woke people left that are still reasonable is that they've got to fucking stop this shit, man. For example, Grums, who I've critiqued multiple times on this channel in the past, most recently over Stellar Blade, has only continued to get worse, constantly chiming in on every gaming culture war topic, even when he clearly has no idea what's going on, and is obviously just trying to kick off the next cycle of outraged discourse over fucking nothing. Madam Savvy, who I've praised on this channel multiple times in the past, has turned her back on pretty much every anti-war, anti-neocon stance she used to hold, and has surgically transformed her body into a Trump semen repository. Lady Decade, who got started during the COVID era, probably due to lockdowns, and used to make content about obscure bits of gaming history, demo versions of games, or unreleased games, or rare hardware or ROM hacks, if they're really good. But after the Sweet Baby Inc. thing kicked off, she shifted her focus away from the cool video game history stuff and towards modern video game controversies, inevitably becoming a culture war channel as a result. Honestly, what happened to most of the anti-woke channels was basically the same thing that happened in the wake of the first Gamergate back in 2014. The anti-woke crowd now, and the anti-SJWs then, for all of their edginess and crassness, did have some pretty good critiques of progressivism within the video game industry. And as a result of that well-earned success, they began to believe they understood not only progressivism in gaming, but progressivism in real politics. Just apply the same lens of analysis you picked up in the culture war over to stuff that actually fucking matters. Why not? Well, in reality, that doesn't actually work. And none of these people know how actual political structures and institutions and laws function. I don't blame them for that, it's not their wheelhouse. Not everyone can know everything. But the fact that at least some of these guys talk so fucking confidently about stuff they are supremely ignorant on, well, that's a level of intellectual dishonesty and moral corrosiveness that is frankly pretty hard to beat online right now. It doesn't get much worse than this retardation.
Never go full retard.
Anyway, all of this is to show that almost nobody came to the defense of pathways. And the latest round of the culture war was basically just a one-sided fight where the anti-woke crowd was swinging at ghosts. The only real defensive pathways that I was actually able to find was that LBC clip, despite my best efforts. Perhaps more damningly, though, is that most of the anti-woke YouTubers who made content on pathways, talking about how the woke progressives are losing their minds over the Amelia memes, they never actually responded to any of the woke progressives. Probably because there's not actually that many of them out there talking about this. Instead, most of them were like that Will guy.
They simply assumed the people they don't like were angry, without actually ever showing anybody being angry.
And I think the reason for that can basically be boiled down to a type of hypocritical simpery. It turns out that while a lot of these guys might claim to like Amelia and her goth-adjacent look, in actuality, their relationship with that subculture, and what it represents politically, is a lot more complicated. The Amelia problem is the same type of problem as the whole Nazis look cool thing, though this time it's not cool, it's cute, but the same logic applies. Everyone knows that the Nazis, for all of their faults, had cool looking uniforms. It's just the truth. The aesthetic is attractive, even if the ideas are evil. In fact, that was part of the psyop. Amelia's cuteness makes the ideas she believes in more palatable, which is why it was absolutely retarded for the developers of Pathways to make the poster child of the ideology they clearly oppose a cute, purple-haired, choker-wearing goth GF. Like, are you guys fucking stupid?
What are you? An idiot sandwich.
I think the fact that they made the choker-wearing, dyed-hair goth girl the antagonist of Pathways, or at least the closest thing the game has to an antagonist, is the best evidence we have that the game was made by boomers. I know that goth girls are highly idealized in the internet culture of 2026. Nowadays, everyone wants a goth GF. And it's gotten to the point that they're so over-sexualized, some actual goth chicks out there are getting a bit fed up with the widespread assumption that they're sexually promiscuous based solely on their fashion choice. But there was actually a period of time, like 20 years ago, when girls like Amelia were considered scary by the mainstream. The archetype of the troublemaker, the girl you don't want to hang out with. There's a scene from a 2006 episode of the kids show Drake and Josh that occasionally gets reposted nowadays that will show you exactly what I mean. Check this out.
I hear you kiss good.
Oh, no, not really.
You're our new boyfriend.
I get to kiss him first.
No, I do.
No, you don't.
Oh, kiss me! Save me, Cuddles!
Okay, by today's standards, this scene is almost incomprehensible. Imagine being a 17-year-old guy, and there's two goth girls in your class that are hitting on you at the same time. They're willing to share you, even. The YouTube comments that are on this clip describe what audiences nowadays think of this scene. I feel like a man dying of thirst watching another man drown. And here's the thing, the girls in the show aren't ugly or anything, but in the show's narrative, they're reviled for being goth girls, because the normie opinion 20 years ago was that goth girls were unattractive. Now personally, I never thought that even back then. I guess I'm just a man of superior taste. However, I do recognize that this was the mainstream view of alt fashion during this period. Punks, emo kids, scene kids, actual goths are nowadays all lumped together under the nebulous label of goth or goth-adjacent. Not only because they each feature dark clothes, dark makeup, dyed hair, edgy music about being depressed, and oftentimes actual real emotional trauma, but also because the dominant culture of the 2000s, which was overwhelmingly controlled by boomers, viewed them all as kind of scary. And you know what? I get it. Sometimes they were just weird kids with fishnets and trust issues, saying, "You don't understand, Dad!"
This freaking sucks.
But other times they actually were devil-worshipping, violence-fantasizing freaks. Considering that the most famous school shooting of all time, the 1999 Columbine High School Massacre, was perpetuated by two guys who had at least 1 foot in that scene, with the black trench coats and the hating the jocks at school and all that. I understand why back then, the boomers looked at alt fashion and saw a dangerous subculture. And as somebody who was in school during that period, yeah, there was definitely this half-joking but kinda real advice of be nice to the quiet kid who wears a trench coat, because if you are, he might actually spare you on Judgment Day.
You were the only one that was ever nice to me.
However, at the same time, the people who viewed alt culture in a more positive light were the same people creating the TV shows that my generation and younger actually watched during this period. And if I had to pick a true starting point of the depiction of a more positive alt subculture that young people were drawn to, it would be Daria. Before Daria, the youth outsider archetype was overwhelmingly depicted as negative. Like, for example, look at the bullies from The Simpsons, or Roger from Doug or something. Actually, Doug featured both types of alt. Roger, the punk bully archetype, clad in leather and prone to violence, and Judy, the theater kid archetype, overly dramatic and highly self-centered. And they both featured a shaved side head, depicted in Doug's art style, with these little dots representing stubble. Daria herself began as a side character in Beavis and Butthead, which itself was a negative depiction of 90s teen slacker culture. But Daria, in her own show, was something different, intelligent, sardonic, and, like every alt character, on the fringes of the high school social hierarchy. Daria was a character that a lot of people were drawn to, along with her friend, and I mean it, only friend, Jane.
I'm straight.
Who was cut from much the same cloth. The Daria show became highly popular, in my opinion, in part because it was one of the first times that characters on the fringes of the normal high school story, the weirdos, the kids who would be backgrounders in a normal teen drama, were actually depicted in a positive manner. Also, rewatching Daria nowadays really does show how the 2026 label of goth has expanded outward to encompass all types of alt. Because back in 1997, these characters weren't goth. In fact, the show actually does have a real goth chick, Andrea. Though to be honest, with the exception of the black lipstick, there's not much of a difference stylistically between her and Jane. In case you can't tell, I love Daria. I could ramble on about that show for hours, but I'm not sure you guys would be down for that.
Have you lost your mind?
My point is, Daria was the turning point, where alt characters began to be depicted in media as normal people. Before this, it was more like that Drake and Josh clip. I know, Drake and Josh came after Daria, but Daria was specifically made for alt audiences, while Drake and Josh was more normie-oriented. You know what I'm getting at. These fashion choices were used as a way to signal to the audience that these were the bad kids, at least until Daria came around. And after her, more positive representations of these archetypes gradually became commonplace, like for example Raven in Teen Titans, or Shigo in Kim Possible. As the 2000s progressed, the slow trickle of characters like this became a huge flow. A lot of those anti-woke YouTubers who exhibit this strange hypocrisy towards the alt style, where on the one hand they revile it for the politics it apparently represents, but on the other hand they praise it when a character like Amelia comes along, these guys are overwhelmingly millennial-aged men, who, in their youth, they were the nerds, outsiders themselves, which means they probably grew up with Daria, and possibly with some of those 2000s era cartoons too, depending on their age. They were the group that were kids and teens, right during that specific moment in time when the alt girl was beginning to move out of the scary camp and into the desirable camp. And they were themselves part of that demographic, who also understood what it was like to be an outsider. Everyone might play video games nowadays, but if you played them in the 90s, you were bullied. So, the politics of the anti-woke crowd pushes them down a path that necessarily leads them away from the girls that they grew up being interested in. They have to do this exaggerated faux disdain for the women and the style and the subculture that they used to like, that in their youth they idealized. And during the era of the SJW, or social justice warrior from the early 2010s, that all had to be pushed down and suppressed, until alt girls came along, expressing political opinions that their new selves could accept anyway. And all the while, the old boomers just never liked that alt shit.
That boy ain't right.
This dynamic even played out in pornography. Nowadays, it's trivial to hop over to Pornhub and watch a video of the big-titted goth GF of your dreams giving sloppy toppy to the camera, but it wasn't always so. The reason the porn site Suicide Girls remain niche, despite starting during the height of the emo craze, is because these alternative styles were the domain of young people. And adult men in 2006 wanted their porn to feature blonde bimbo types, or inexplicably above 18 cheerleaders or whatever.
Well, I was born by the snatch. Now I want to die by the snatch. So come up here and sit on my face and take my breath away.
All of this is to say that every other character in Pathways looks like a normie, while Amelia looks like an alt girl. And it's a pretty safe guess that the reason the characters look like this are because the game was funded by 100-year-old fossils who still think that Amelia's look signals an attractiveness to the audience, that she's the bad kid in class, the one who has no future, you shouldn't hang out with her. In the context of the UK, that stereotype's been present ever since the mod youth subculture from like 50 years ago. In a previous video, I forget which one it was, but it doesn't really matter, we discussed Professor Stanley Cohen's book, Folk Devils and Moral Panics. Though he was the first to actually describe how a moral panic develops, operates, and eventually dissipates, the examples he used were the mod and rocker subcultures of the UK back in the 1970s. And these groups absolutely had a punk or goth-adjacent fashion sense, but in terms of their political values, they weren't strictly left or right wing, at least not consistently. What they were, first and foremost, was anti-state, anti-institution, and anti-society. As a result, the British mainstream of the early 1970s began to equate that fashion sense with a general anti-government, anti-mainstream sentiment. And here we are 50 years later, with those same people still in charge of messaging, thinking that those same symbols still apply in the 2020s, when in actuality they just don't. The stereotypes that the creators of Pathways relied on to signal to the audience that Amelia is the bad kid, those died out back in the 2000s.
Future's now, old man.
Another interesting thing about the Amelia craze is that it basically showed the whole dyed hair beware thing on the right to be a load of bullshit. Before the rise of the 2010s SJW, dyed hair was one of the many symbols of the cool alt chick. But after Gamergate, the right wing began to say, don't get with girls who have dyed hair, or who have piercings or tattoos, or who wear chokers. That means they're promiscuous LGBTQ SJW woke groomer whores. Hell, the big meme about this during Gamergate was that Zoe Quinn's dyed hair was a form of aposematism, the biological term for poisonous animals with brightly colored skin, where the bright colors signal that the animal is poisonous and therefore should be left alone, like some species of frog. It's a funny meme, and for years was taken as a truthism in right-wing spaces. Over time, large right-wing accounts began associating dyed hair with extreme far-left political positions, and right-wing people began to talk about how unattractive dyed hair was on girls, how real men actually wanted blonde-haired, sundress-wearing, stay-at-home trad wives, and how dads who let their daughters become dyed-hair degenerates were failures as men. And then as soon as Amelia came along, all of that went out the fucking window. In fact, let's go back to Will's channel, that anti-woke YouTuber from earlier. Here he is, describing Amelia in a positive light.
Somewhere along the way, the people running Britain and much of the West decided that attention, thought, pride and identity were liabilities. And nowhere is that clearer than in the bizarre, hilarious and deeply revealing saga of Amelia. Amelia wasn't born from fandom. She wasn't designed to be loved. She was engineered to be hated by the British state. And on paper, Pathways exists to help young people recognize online radicalization. In practice, it functions as something else entirely, a morality play about which beliefs are acceptable and which are not. Amelia is introduced as the dangerous influence. She's stylish, confident, goth-adjacent, purple-haired, and, crucially, she expresses ideas that, until very recently, would have been considered completely normal. Love of country, support for secure borders, skepticism of mass immigration, pride in national heritage. In Pathways, these views are not debated. They are not challenged intellectually, they are pathologized.
Okay, forget about the fact that he's massively overstating his case again. Notice what he said about Amelia's aesthetic. Stylish, confident, goth-adjacent, and purple-haired. All true. However, in other videos on his channel, he's described the Amelia archetype, the Amelia style. You know, the dyed hair, choker-wearing, progressive art hoe, in a very negative way.
Like clockwork, says Louise, who actually looks like a relatively normal human being, by the way. I thought she'd have like a side shave, blue hair, dye job, tattoos on her face, that kind of thing, but no, looks like a woman.
What do you mean, looks like a woman? You know, you can have tattoos and a side head shave and still look like a woman, you know that? Or what, Will? Do you think these girls look like men? That'd be awfully trans-inclusive of you. But more importantly for our topic today, the alt-girl aesthetic is commonly used as a stand-in for undesirable politics by these anti-woke types, and even by the broader right wing. These people have spent years talking about how they hated the Amelia look because it signaled to them progressivism. Have these guys suddenly become interested in alt-girls again? Or maybe it was never actually about the aesthetic at all.
Liar!
Funnily enough, the bipolar relationship the right has with the Amelia aesthetic has played out several other times within the past few weeks, making the contradiction pretty obvious to anybody who's actually paying attention to things right now. For example, another recent controversy happening right now is the drama surrounding the release of the Overwatch hero Anran. The voice actress of Anran, Fariha Anderson, dropped this TikTok where she outlines her complaints about Anran's attractiveness.
I'm nervous about this video because I didn't want to not address the elephant in the room, but I didn't want to step on the devs' toes or speak on their behalf because it's this tightrope in my mind of trying to honor the community and everyone's criticisms because I agree, and also give grace to the developers because they're always trying their best in the situation they're in. I got to mourn Anran between the design I had hoped for her and the design we ended up with. Because I think in her comic and the cinematic Elemental Kin, there was a precedent set by it. There was a unspoken promise that said, we're going to challenge the beauty standards plaguing and ransacking media these days, right? The Ozempic chic, the contour your nose, you have no nose, the tiniest nose. And I think because of that precedence, people feel understandably let down.
Now, this video is not about the Overwatch Enran drama. I will not be going into the details or closely examining these events. The TLDR is that when Anren was released in-game, she was very traditionally attractive, and progressives online, including Anderson herself, were hoping for a character design that went against those traditional beauty standards. Whether that's good or bad is outside the scope of today's discussion. However, I want to point out a couple of things. 1. The anti-woke crowd dogpiled Anderson for being a woke troublemaker trying to cancel Blizzard or Overwatch. Okay, I get the logic. And 2. The anti-woke crowd dogpiled Anderson for wanting unattractive female characters in games, specifically because they think she's unattractive herself, and her activism is just cope. And this is where the anti-woke crowd lost the plot. If you object to Anderson's politics, fine, but she is clearly an attractive woman. Like, here she is with her girlfriend, and whoever's saying these girls are ugly have completely lost their fucking minds. I would watch that porn video any day, dude. You don't gotta ask me twice. The issue is that Anderson is not a blonde-haired, sundress-wearing stay-at-home tradwife. She is in fact a dyed-hair art-ho alt-girl. Anderson is, aesthetically, more closely related to Amelia than either of them are to the tradwife. Another recent example of this conversation playing out was that American Olympic gold medalist in figure skating, Alyssa Liu. This chick screams alt-girl style to me. The hair dye, the piercings, the behavior. Once again, fully examining this story is outside the scope of this video, but the online right had a very strange relationship with this public figure. Initially, they called her Gooner bait, saying who cares if some progressive dyed hair art hoe was winning gold medals? She's just a Zoomer degenerate. And then, a little bit later, when she proved to be wildly popular with basically everyone, the right wholeheartedly embraced her, saying now that her personal politics don't matter at all, because she's representing America. Some people began fabricating far-right quotes, and pretended she said them on social media somewhere, which then got amplified and passed around in the internet telephone game, in order to astroturf the image of Liu as the internet's Nazi queen. None of it was true, but it is incredible how the stuff the right wing usually hates, the dyed hair and facial piercings, immediately stopped mattering as soon as right-wing idiots online began to believe she was one of them. It is very telling that the whole dyed hair beware thing only becomes a part of the conversation if the woman in question promotes progressive political positions. In other words, when the right wing has been talking for years now about the whole Aposematism thing, the blue-haired SJW feminist archetype, and how they're totally unattractive, I'm pretty sure that was just fucking cope. Because as soon as Amelia appeared, a character fitting that archetype, who nonetheless had right-wing political positions, suddenly the right loved that style again, until the next drama when they didn't. In the end, it's not actually about the dyed hair or the piercings or anything else. And when right-wingers call those women with an alt-fashion sense disgusting or unappealing, Amelia pretty much proved decisively that they're just coping. In fact, the entire Amelia saga has actually shown a spotlight on a major problem with the right's worldview. But the best way for me to explain that is to actually do what those anti-woke guys didn't. You know, respond to a real left-wing criticism of Amelia, rather than just fighting your own straw men. Except Smash, though. Like I said, he's one of the better ones. Even if he is inventing a quote for his thumbnail. Come on, man. As a quick refresher, here's what was said on LBC.
This character has essentially been taken over, and it's staggering that how quickly this has proliferated across the internet. The middle of last week, from nothing at the start of January, there were 12,000 posts involving this character in one day. So people are now rapidly generating this character, putting it into AI videos, putting it into all the kind of right-wing tropes.
Amelia hasn't been hijacked by the far right or whatever. Amelia was made to represent the right. This is just basic death of the author stuff. The story of Pathways, as read by normal, reasonable people, says something wildly different than what the creators of Pathways intended. And exploring how and why will get us to the core of the issue. If there's one thing that Gamergate taught the internet 12 fucking years ago, it's that when moral busybodies using government funding come down from on high and shit out propaganda games in an attempt to move people away from right-wing politics, what inevitably happens is that those games and their creators get clowned on. The reason for this is because the propagandists almost never actually understand the thing they are critiquing, leading to a truly ridiculous piece of media. Like, for example, when Amelia says, "British values are being eroded, let's protest." There's 4 ways to interpret that position. 1, British values are being eroded and it's a good thing, because British values are bad. Therefore, protesting in their defense is also bad. 2, British values are being eroded, and it's a bad thing, because British values are good, and therefore, protesting in their defense is also good. 3, British values aren't actually being eroded, and Amelia, as well as the other protesters, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are a part of a false flag operation designed to rile people up over nothing. And 4, although British values may or may not be good, when Amelia says British values, she's actually dog whistling for something more sinister. In reality, the protest isn't actually about British values. The protesters are simply mask on. Let's examine these 4 possibilities. Well, if the creators of the game intended for the correct interpretation to be the 4th one, where Amelia and the other protesters are dog whistling, they didn't actually set that up in the text. There's no moment where she goes mask off. There's no hint that something else is underneath here. Her characterization is actually pretty consistent. So, even if they meant for the game to be an example of dog whistling, it's not. There is a little bit of evidence that the creators of the game intended the 3rd option to be the correct one, that Amelia and the others are protesting over nothing, or that their concerns are overblown. The scene where Charlie scrolls by a TikTok of immigrants taking veteran housing, only to shortly after see another video of the veteran getting different housing, is done poorly, but it's also presenting the message that Charlie's concerns are due to their own ignorance, not due to something bad that's actually happening. Even then, though, this is pretty weak. That leaves the first 2 options, which are more straightforward. Either the game is saying that British values are bad, therefore it's good to erode them, or that British values are good, and therefore it's bad to erode them. The game doesn't outright say it, but the first option is broadly left-coded, and the second is broadly right-coded. Considering the feedback the game gives you, in the form of the alignment meter, showing the player becoming more radicalized every time they choose to defend British values, Pathways appears to be directly telling the player that the left-coded position is the correct one, that British values are bad, and eroding them is good. The problem with this is that your average Joe generally doesn't hold the view that their own country and values are bad, not without a lot more nuance in the argument, which Pathways simply fails to build out, meaning there's an obvious dissonance between how the player feels and how the game tells the player they should be feeling.
That doesn't make sense.
Pathways does not tackle these issues in such a way that the right-wing position is shown how it could be wrong. It simply assumes they are wrong, with no explanation or exploration whatsoever, and it ends up railroading the player down these incoherent paths that make no sense based on the narrative. Anyone with a brain can see this problem, but right-wingers specifically, the people who are being propagandized against, to them it's extremely obvious that their ideas are not even being engaged with, which is why a lot of right-wing YouTubers made jokey playthroughs of this game, with all of them coming to the same conclusion. Pathways is a propaganda piece made by boomers. Teachers will force kids to play this, thinking they're being educated, while the kids will just laugh at how out of touch it is. And right-wing ideas are not accurately being presented or meaningfully being challenged because the British establishment does not actually understand right-wing ideas. They just scream Nazi over and over again.
How do you do, fellow kids?
In fact, here's a little trivia tidbit that kind of gives away their whole game, no pun intended. People dug around Pathways' source files and discovered unused content. I wonder when this will be uploaded to the cutting room floor. Do you recall back in the final day, there was that weird scene with Charlie staring at their laptop? Well, it turns out there was actually originally a 6th choice during this final chapter, and the selection for it probably did actually appear on Charlie's laptop screen. They just awkwardly changed the scene so that there was only one choice. That's why the alignment meter moves into the green after this part, even though no choice was made, because there used to be one here. Here's the other 2 endings that were cut. If you hypothetically chose the cutout middle path, Charlie pulls away from both the teacher and their friends and family, becoming depressed and isolated. If you chose the bad path, Charlie flips out on the teacher, goes to hang out with Amelia, where she's fully supportive, and then they ultimately get arrested for violating the UK's hate speech laws. But these 2 endings were cut from the final game. The game's sole remaining ending is the good path from this cut choice, Charlie admitting they need help and getting referred to the Pathways program for counseling. Maybe the government or Shoutout UK or whoever wanted these other endings cut. Maybe the creators themselves didn't have the balls to follow through with a bad ending. But you know what? The game is actually slightly more accurate with these other endings included. I mean, listen guys, if your goal is to propagandize the youth into not being reactionaries, you'd think you'd leave in the ending where Charlie faces consequences for being a reactionary, even if that ending is rather draconian by pro-free speech liberal standards. The core problem with the narrative of Pathways is that it treats all concerns about immigration or Islam in the UK as fundamentally incorrect or irrational, or stemming from some personal problem that the questioner has, like Charlie's parents being divorced and them needing therapy to get over it. This does happen sometimes, so fair enough. But there's no space in this narrative for a well-adjusted individual to have good faith concerns about immigration. The UK's multicultural society is simply assumed to be fully good, with no issues or concerns, and anyone who has a problem with it is actually just projecting their personal problems onto the wider society. It couldn't be that the UK is fundamentally a liberal society, a liberal culture, and that immigrants with value systems that we might call illiberal or anti-liberal can sometimes not integrate well into a liberal society. No, the problem is you for complaining about it, and you probably have a bad home life to boot.
You're always telling me that I'm projected. You're projected.
I know that tons of people have taken to calling me a leftist, communist, anti-fuck cuck or whatever the fuck recently because of my anti-Trump stances. But at my core, I am a liberal because liberalism is mostly correct about the world. That means I criticize the right a lot because the right is incorrect about the world. But that doesn't mean I'm some loyal friend of the left. One of the areas the left is wrong on is on immigration. I have no problems with people coming to Western liberal countries to respect liberal values, to integrate, and leave their old illiberal values behind. I'm not an ethnonat. I don't care about race or ethnicity. I care about liberal values continuing into the future, no matter whose brains those values are in. Left-wing people have this naive, blank slate-esque belief that all people are fundamentally the same, but they're not. For example, if you pluck a baby out of the Middle East and give him to a set of Western liberal parents, that baby will probably end up as a Western liberal himself. However, if you bring in a 40-year-old man from the Middle East, he's not going to magically abandon all of his values and adopt all of ours, simply by virtue of stepping on liberal land. He has 40 years of another culture's values and practices within him. Of course, some of those values and practices are completely compatible with liberal ones, but others might not be, and that can cause a serious problem. This is why, for example, the Queers for Palestine thing is so fucking brainless and stupid, when a shit ton of Palestinians would absolutely kill Western queers if they had the chance. It turns out cultures are not all the same. They're not all worthy of the same moral consideration. A culture is not beautiful or moral simply because it's exotic to you. Some cultures are just barbaric, and they should not be allowed to come into a liberal society in large enough numbers that they fail to integrate, and instead they create these pockets of illiberalism. There should never be a fucking Sharia law zone in a liberal country. Editing dev cutting in real quick. While I was putting this video together, this post went viral, and is a great example of what I'm talking about. Putting aside the editorializing tweet, the contents of the video show Pakistani community leaders in Greece complaining about being unable to bring their wives over from Pakistan, because their wives are also their cousins, and while Pakistan allows family intermarriage, Greece does not. They're advocating for Greek laws to be changed to allow cousin marriages, and claiming the current situation is bigoted against them. This is one of those instances where it should be such that, if you want to come to the West, you can, guys, but the trade-off is, you leave the cousin fucking behind. If you want to do that shit, go do it back home. But this is what I mean. In the face of stuff like this, it is reasonable to stand up for Western cultural values, and not simply say, oh, everything's acceptable. We're all the same, right, guys? No, we're not. Liberalism is not the absence of values. It is a system of values in and of itself that must be defended and promoted by liberals. Immigrants should be welcome in liberal countries, but when their traditional values clash with our liberal ones, their invitation should be predicated on the expectation that they abandon those clashing values in favor of ours. Our countries are liberal countries, and liberal values should take precedence. And if you think that's somehow racist, you're a fucking retard. Now, thankfully for me, this problem is not really all that prevalent in North America, but in Europe, that's a different story. And I think this is why Amelia became one of those breakaway memes. There are, of course, many legitimate racists getting involved in it. Place your bets on whether or not this image of Charlie asking Amelia to secure a future for the white race, while a Muslim burns in the background, is just an edgy meme made by some shitposter, or alternatively is the real views of a white supremacist, using this event to normalize his violent rhetoric through humor. But at the same time, there are also a lot of normal people who actually aren't all that racist. They have no problem with the friendly immigrant who runs the corner store down the street or whatever.
Thank y'all, come again.
But nonetheless, they are absolutely fed up with the actual problems that extremist immigrants cause. And they're also fed up with being called a racist for wanting those problems solved. When it comes to this idea that all cultures are equally worthy of respect, the left is just wrong. And anybody who's not on the left can see this plain as day. And getting back to pathways for a minute, the game does not actually have space for good faith criticism of the current immigration paradigm. Even neutral choices, where honest inquiry is engaged in, leads to negative outcomes for Charlie. The reason for this is obvious, it's propaganda. But the reason the right latched onto the game so strongly isn't simply because Amelia is cute, though that helped a lot. It's because on a meta level, the game accurately represents the worldview of the right wing. The game says it's bad, but it never argues why it's bad. Let me show you what I mean. Here is the basic overview of what the Pathways game presents to the player. Charlie is beginning to engage with a new, far-right political ideology, and no matter what choices you make, he ends up getting referred for counseling and diversity training. During counseling, Charlie discovers they fell down the alt-right pipeline or whatever due to their bad home life, like their parents' divorce, and therapy helps them to come to terms with that situation. They're referred to support programs and given a mentor, and eventually they're able to complete their college program and carry on with their life. Now, here is what the right wing sees when they play Pathways. No matter what choices you make, Charlie ends up getting shoved into the re-education program. Their counselor convinces them the reason they have problems with immigration isn't because there's actually a real problem with immigration. It's because dad left the family, and they're projecting all of their issues outward. Charlie's therapy allows him to cope with the realities of the new world. The support programs and the mentor exist to make the re-education stick. Both of these readings are within the bounds of what little the game actually gives the player to work with.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
For example, it's just true that of the various adults Charlie interacts with during Pathways, almost none of them are straight white men. Knowing that, here is how the right wing interprets the characterization the game provides. Dad is largely absent from Charlie's life. The other adults in the house are all women. Charlie's teacher is a woman. All of Charlie's adult role models are trying to shove him into the longhouse. The police are white men, but they only show up to arrest Charlie. They exist as the enforcement arm of the state. They appear in Charlie's life not to guide him onto the right path, but to punish him for going onto the wrong one. The therapist is a brown-skinned man. The support panel Charlie interacts with consists of a Muslim woman and an old white boomer who is selling his country out to immigrants, pulling the ladder up behind him, and who is complicit in the re-education of young native British people to accept a state of affairs where their quality of life is decreased for the benefit of boomers and immigrants. And the mentor is another cucked young white person who has already been castrated by the program and is no longer willing to fight back. Now, this is a very biased telling of what's in Pathways, but it's also not inaccurate. With what little the game gives you, you can absolutely read it this way. This isn't a fanfic. This interpretation of events does exist in the text, and the creators of the game simply didn't see it because they don't understand what the fuck they're critiquing. They don't understand the right-wing mindset, and that is why Amelia went viral. The game accurately presents the right wing's own worldview, that the bureaucracy around Charlie exists to keep them docile, propagandized, and plugged into the multicultural system, while Amelia represents freedom from that system, the youthful energy of political change, the raging against the machine.
La Résistance!
The various fan arts and edits and AI-generated images of Amelia don't actually change all that much about her. The right didn't need to twist her into something she's not. She is a fully accurate representation of British right-wing views, and the creators of Pathways did nothing to actually push back against her positions, except say they're bad, with no real explanation as to why. In the real world, the dissident right views modernity as decadent and corrupt and fallen, that immigration and technological advancement and unchecked capitalism has destroyed the old traditional lifestyle that their people used to enjoy. From their point of view, government micromanagement of the lives of individuals, educating them into accepting the modern world, is an evil being perpetrated on the population. Therapy exists not to help you work through your issues, but to allow you to cope with the inhuman world the globalists have built around you. The machine hates masculine authority figures because heterosexual masculinity is threatening to their bureaucracy, which is why they encourage everyone to be gay or trans or whatever. All education is propaganda, because there can never truly be a values-neutral education. What the kids are taught, or not taught, is explicitly political, ideological, and for the benefit of the state. Medication exists not to treat the problems you have, but because you are the problem that society is treating.
Goodbye, everyone. I'll remember you all in therapy.
Now, back in reality, while there are some good critiques of the modern world, I think the dissident right massively overstates their position. They are ultimately more incorrect than correct. But Pathways doesn't do any of the work of showing how. That's why the few lefties who discovered this whole drama are saying things like, whoever made that stupid anti-radicalism game should be lined up against a wall and shot for what they've created, because they also see what's gone wrong here. The game failed to actually address the real questions the right has raised about the state of the world. And there are good answers to those questions. But in failing to do so, the game has simply handed the right a shit ton of ammo. It's the equivalent of showing like 30 minutes of footage glorifying the Nazis, presenting them to the audience as brave war heroes saving their country, and then tacking on a short note at the end saying Nazis are bad. Well, okay, but you didn't show how they were bad. In fact, you showed a whole lot of the opposite. That's why this whole thing blew up. The game failed to show the actual negative side of Amelia's argument, because the people who put it together don't actually understand Amelia's argument. In fact, that's why a fan made this alternate ending to the game.
Charlie was arrested and informed that due to an offensive tweet they had made, they were going to be charged and sent to court. As David Lammy had decided to scrap jury trials, Charlie was tried by the Labour Party approved judge and found guilty of on indictment with an offence of inciting racial hatred, the particulars of the offence being that they published and distributed written material on the social media platform X. Charlie was thus sentenced to 3 years in prison. Charlie did not receive any visitors in prison. Their parents did not want to risk associating with such a dangerous speech criminal in case by hearing something they themselves would be committing a crime. Despite the overflowing prisons in Britain due to Keir Starmer's new hate speech laws, a space was found for Charlie by releasing a violent sex offender early, as at least they had not said anything hurtful online. Charlie was forced into re-education struggle sessions in which they were taught all about the new tiers of racial equality and social justice. Although according to the state-appointed teacher all people were equal, some people were more equal than others. Charlie tried their best to understand all these contradicting and confusing rules, but sadly, they could not grasp why, for example, a one-legged Muslim man was ranked more oppressed than a polyqueer, gender-fluid, non-binary lesbian. Charlie was able to be released early on the condition their vote would automatically go to the Labour Party if there was an election in the following years, although many of these elections were being postponed indefinitely due to issues with the electoral system. Charlie knew not to question this as they didn't want to risk being sent back to re-education sessions. Whatever the great leader Keir Starmer had planned was in the best interests of the country. Charlie received a phone call from Amelia. They were very worried as despite finding Amelia attractive, Charlie thought she might get them into trouble again. Amelia explained that she was campaigning for the rights of political prisoners and the rights of oppressed people. Charlie was so relieved. If they met with Amelia at this campaign, it was for a good social justice cause, and there was no risk they would get into trouble again for thought crime. However, while they were out campaigning, a police officer approached. Charlie had not thought to question what disadvantaged groups they were fighting for. Amelia was fighting for the rights of the oppressed British people and for political prisoners who, just like Charlie, had been locked up for simply voicing their opinions online. The police officer, which were now simply known as stormtroopers, told them they were under arrest. Amelia suddenly pulled out a pistol, which was very illegal in Britain due to the government disarming the populace, and began shooting at the stormtrooper while shouting, "Die, you fucking commie pig!" Oh dear, thought Charlie. The revolution had begun.
Wow, that escalated quickly at the end there. While this is obviously a joke, it also naturally follows from what Pathways laid out within its narrative. An ending they didn't have the stones to show, but also logically follows from what the game presents as its canon. There's a second fake ending, made by a different memester, Dr. Foxotic, though this one is a little less doomer.
Despite the government's attempts at controlling Charlie, he kept using his human right to free speech and stood up for what he believed in. This was illegal. Although the police successfully arrested many natives for sharing memes on Twitter, there wasn't enough persecution, and so Charlie and his friend Amelia were able to speak. This was a major attack on democracy, which unfortunately led to the election of leaders who wanted to protect the indigenous and their culture. As a result of Charlie's actions, all the immigrants went home, and because of this, there was much less demand for housing, which naturally caused house prices to plummet. This unfortunately meant Charlie could afford to buy a house for himself. A house that could have gone to 10 Somali men. Not only that, but with the huge amounts of migrants gone home, there was much less competition in the jobs market, meaning Charlie and all his friends found jobs that could have gone to migrants. Eventually, Charlie went on to marry Amelia. They had 4 children, all of which had white skin. This was clearly racist. Despite all this, Charlie was somehow happy. But at what cost? Millions of foreigners who came to the UK for free housing and social welfare now had to return home and work for a living. Crime rates mysteriously plummeted, which meant the prisons were virtually empty. This saved hundreds of millions of pounds, money that could have gone to providing migrant grooming gangs with food and shelter during their stay in prison. And it was all thanks to this right bunch of Charlies. Or should I say 4 right bunch of Charlies.
Like the last one, this joke ending naturally follows within Pathways as the canon story. Nothing has to be twisted or rewritten. In fact, there was one left-wing artist who tried to reclaim Amelia as a trans rights icon. And while there might be a growing collection of Dick Girl Amelia Rule 34 too, this just comes off as desperate and cringe. Even if you disagree with the politics behind Amelia, this just isn't what the character is. I gotta admit though, that animation of a trans rights pro-Palestine Amelia driving around in a technical with her hijabi girlfriend is pretty cute.
The lesson to take away from this is, if you're going to do de-radicalization propaganda, you can't do it like this. You actually have to understand the ideas you're critiquing. You have to know when they have a good point. You have to know how your good points will be received by them. You have to know how to counter their arguments. And the people who made Pathways had none of that knowledge. They simply assumed that saying this is bad and appealing to vague decades-old symbols of what boomers thought was bad back in the day was enough. And it wasn't. And speaking of those people, I think it's high time that we finally talked about them. So, it should be very clear to you by now that Pathways was an utter failure, both as a game and as a piece of progressive propaganda. Throughout this video, I've referred to the creators of the game as boomers, but that's not quite accurate.
The baby boomers.
It is absolutely boomers who wanted that game made, don't get me wrong, but it's millennials who made it happen. A specific team of millennials, in fact. The Pathways game was created by a group called Shoutout UK, a politically non-partisan organization whose goal is to spread political and media literacy, or at least that's how they describe themselves. The original form the Pathways story took was actually a short film showing how any ideology can radicalize, not just far-right stuff. Now, I went scouring across the internet looking for this film in its original form, and either it's been scrubbed or my ability to find things has massively degraded. The only clip I could find from the film was actually in Harmful Opinions' video on this topic, so you know what? Shout out to him for preserving at least a few seconds of this. He's watching an unlisted YouTube video from the channel of a local police station in the UK, and I have no idea how he found this link. What he shows does sound ridiculous though.
Wait, Matt! Wait! Let us take revenge upon the covers.
But over time, Shoutout UK's focus moved away from general de-radicalization and honed in more on de-radicalizing people from the far right. They never really came out and said that far left or Islamic radicalization was now okay with them, they just stopped focusing on it. In fact, I found a teacher's handbook for the Pathways game, which basically directs educators on how to properly utilize the game in a classroom setting. You know, what kind of questions to ask the kids, how to guide the lesson, that sort of thing. And throughout the handbook, it repeatedly brings up right-wing extremism, but not left-wing extremism or Islamic extremism, or any other form. This is probably because the game itself exclusively presents right-wing issues and icons as radical, and this is a handbook specifically for the game and not any other Shoutout UK project. Okay, fair enough. But are there any other Pathways games focused on other types of radicalization? Well, as far as I can tell, no, there's not.
So that was a fucking lie.
The CEO of Shoutout UK, Matteo Bergamini, has been politically active for over a decade now. I spent like a full day's worth of time, I mean like 24 hours collectively, watching his various public appearances and listening to his podcast, spanning over a decade's worth of content. He's been on mainstream news, he's given talks at public events, he's been a guest on other people's channels. I was hoping to cap off this video with a collection of this dude's wacky takes, kinda like what I did with the Skullgirls video. In that one, there was a section devoted to Mariel Cartwright's descent into insanity to show how the situation got as bad as it did. Unfortunately for us, this time around, there's actually a lot less insanity to pick through. This guy's pretty soy, sure, but there's never a moment where he goes mask off like Mariel did. Like, there's no hidden chat room or leaked texts or anything where this dude is screaming that whites are the problem or whatever.
What's wrong with you, bro? What the heck? You tripping, bro? You tripping!
Oh well, sometimes you go on a huge digging operation and you come up empty-handed. That's just how the YouTube game works. But I did discover a few interesting tidbits I want to go over. Bergamini appeared on the Chatter podcast back on November 10th, 2020, and I swear to God, I've got to be the only person who's actually ever watched this fucking thing, because it's got 9 views, and at least 7 of them are mine, due to me coming back to this page multiple times during editing. Anyway, he was asked about the goal of Shoutout UK, and here's how he described it.
The reason why we call it political literacy rather than political education is because political literacy, think of, it's equivalent of being literate in a language. When you are being literate in a language, you are able to read and write in said language, say English, but doesn't mean you're going to be able to write, I don't know, Shakespearean prose or write a novel in that language. It just means that you've got the bare bone basics to utilize the language for whatever you want to use it for. And that's kind of the way we see political literacy, because we're not here to teach you about mad levels of political theory or what they teach at university. If you want to go and do that, that's on you, and by all means, go do it. But we believe everyone should be literate in the politics that run our country. And what we mean by that is the bare bone basics that our system is made up of. So understanding, for instance, what is first past the post for Westminster elections, understanding what devolution means, understanding what your local council does, how do we elect our councillors, how to become a councillor if you want to be, what is an MP, what's the difference between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, how does a bill become a law, what is the role of the monarchy. All of those kind of legal frameworks that make up our democracy, we class as political literacy. And we think that is something that everybody, no matter what you become, should have a basic knowledge in. Because all of us have the right to vote, campaign, have a say in public inquiries, all of these kind of things that make up our democracy, we all have a right to be engaged with. But that means that the state has a duty to teach us how these things work. There's no point just giving us access to these things if we don't know how many of them work. So that's what we mean by political literacy. It's the almost apolitical side of politics. Because first past the post isn't left-wing or right-wing. Understanding how laws are created isn't left-wing or right-wing. You're not indoctrinating anyone by teaching them how the system works at this current moment.
So, if we take him at his word, this is actually completely reasonable. The example he gave of literacy versus content makes a lot of sense. If you're literate in the English language, that just means you can use English as a tool to communicate. Knowing English doesn't tell you what you should say with that language. Conceptualizing political literacy as not teaching people what to think, but simply how the government works. Yeah, I'm completely on board with that goal. In the American context, a hypothetical political literacy course would not teach American kids to vote Republican or Democrat, but rather it would tell them what Congress does, what the Supreme Court does, what the state governments are all about, that sort of thing. Having the government tell you which political parties are acceptable is kind of spooky, but having the government tell you how the state functions is, in my opinion, essential education. So fair enough. And this kind of hooks into Shoutout UK's original mission statement of being anti-radicalization in all of its forms. However, he gave another interview to TechSoup Europe in 2022, hey, at least this one broke into the double digits in views, where he outright confirmed that yes, his organization overwhelmingly focuses on far-right radicalization nowadays.
Most of the ones that we target tend to be from right-wing or bi-nationalist kind of misinformation.
Well, that's one mystery cleared up at least. I mean, it was a pretty good assumption, but it's always good to hear it straight from the source. Now, in this interview, he also describes the founding of Shoutout UK, which is actually at odds with what's written over on Wikipedia. Over there, the claim is that Shoutout UK was founded in August of 2015 by Bergamini while he was a student at Brunel University. However, it also states that Shoutout UK hosted the 2015 Youth Leaders Debate, which was held on April 28, 2015, months before the organization was apparently founded. This obviously doesn't make any sense. The Shoutout UK website says the organization was founded sometime in 2015, which is unhelpfully vague, but Bergamini himself has said something different. During that Chatter podcast, he describes how Shoutout UK began as his own personal blog while he was a student.
It started off when I was in high school, that kind of growing interest, and then I was lucky enough to be in a college that offered it, so I took the subject, fell in love with government politics, and that kind of grew my interest in it, but also grew my sort of lack of understanding of why is this stuff not being taught to us when we're earlier, when we're younger, and why is only a small section of society that learns or that does government and politics get this kind of information. So after I did my A-levels, I went to Brunel to study politics and history, and whilst at university, I decided to set up a blog called Shoutout UK, where I just started writing about issues that I cared about almost exclusively around the need for political literacy and why it's good for a democracy to teach its citizens how it works. And it started to get a bit of interest, it started to get a bit of attraction. It started to have initially a couple of other young people from Brunel that asked if they could write on it as well. And it kind of grew from there as a blog with a variety of different authors. And then eventually I, through a number of different contacts, managed to meet someone at AQA, the exam board, and found out how to get Shoutout UK as an organization accredited as a centre to then deliver something called unit award statements, which gave me the opportunity to then learn about that and be able to create what eventually became our political literacy program that we now run in, I think it's now over 1,000 schools we've run the program in.
There's still no time frame here though, but that's okay, because during a talk he gave at the Frontline Club back in 2016, he had this sign behind him, the voice of the next generation, which claimed that the organization launched in 2014. Fun fact, he was using this exact same sign years later when he was on Talk Europe in 2019. Hey, waste not. Considering that by 2015 he had graduated from university, and that during those podcasts, he said he started Shoutout UK originally as a student blog, it sounds like the 2014 claim is the correct one. The Wikipedia claim of 2015 is unsourced. However, if this is just a typo, and it actually meant to say August 2014, that would mean that Bergamini started up Shoutout UK at the same time as Gamergate was kicking off. Alas, as fun of a connection as that would have been, the idea that Bergamini got started due to watching Gamergate unfold, or that he was somehow involved in it, is ultimately not true. After all, he did a Gamergate episode on his podcast where he interviewed Brianna Wu, and it seemed like he didn't really know much about it. Would have been funny though. Quickly checking out shoutoutuk.org on the Internet Wayback Machine fetches archives of the site going all the way back to April 2012. And at the bottom of these early archives, it plainly states copyright 2011. Shoutout UK, Matteo Bergamini. If he began Shoutout UK in 2011, that would have made him like 18 at the time. What's kind of funny is that on a 2014 backup of the site, which is extremely broken as you can see, it claims that Shoutout UK was founded in July 2012. So it seems to me like this guy doesn't even know when he started his own organization, and the truth of it is probably lost to time. Now, in case you think I'm just jibber-jabbing, in order to put to use some of those hours I spent digging up this guy's history, well yeah, I am kind of doing that.
Nobody cares.
But I also find this sort of thing interesting, and there is a point to it. On a few of these old site backups, it claims that Shoutout UK is a part of the Left Parallel Society. Whatever this group was, it no longer exists, and there's very little information about it online. The only remaining member who still has a career seems to be Bergamini himself. You know how there's like a friend group of creators or musicians or whatever, and one of them blows up and actually gets a career and, takes off, while the rest of them are left behind and eventually quit or fade into obscurity? Yeah, it seems like Bergamini's relationship with the Left Parallel Society seems to kind of be like that. But nonetheless, it's not hard to figure out what the Left Parallel Society was. On the remnants of their dead website, we can see these statements. The LPS was created out of a disagreement with the capitalist democratic system the majority of the world seems to be adopting. The world is changing. We are now gaining more and more information. New technology and new ways of looking at the world have been developed, yet we still have tribal national politics. Nationalism is still rife throughout the world. Corporations govern the strongest tribal nation with an iron fist. New ways of thinking have uncovered new problems, global problems. These problems can't be solved by one nation alone, but by the global cooperation of all nations under one supreme form of government. This cannot occur while we still have rivalries between each other. Capitalism thrives on rivalry and consumerism, the two most damaging forces on the planet. For a new world order to prevail, we must let go of the old. Our society is new, but the idea has been around for centuries, some implementing it badly, some on the other hand very well. It's the ability to run a society of mutual benefit that underpins us and our work. However, due to us having to run parallel to the old system for the time being, finance is required to let us keep operating. We accept any donation. Please help create an alternative, a brighter future. The LPS is an organization which supports a group of like-minded individuals who are trying to portray a different type of society than the money and waste-oriented society that we are currently forced to live with. Rather than service for capital exchange, the LPS is suggesting a service for service exchange in trade and commerce. LPS suggests that a healthy economy can still run when everyone is exchanging services for services rather than services at a profit. This idea would make sure everyone contributed to society, rather than having some people contribute to the betterment of society and others riding on their findings and success, from each according to his ability to each according to his need.
I am a tanky. In my bones, I'm a tanky. In my soul, I'm a tanky. I am a Stalinist.
Okay, so in case you didn't figure it out, the LPS was a group promoting some type of retarded international communist organization, and it was probably made up of a bunch of young idiots like Bergamini himself back in 2011. Also, if you know your political theory, then you know what Left Parallel Society is referring to, without even having to read any of this shit. Lenin first outlined the basic idea in the essay Dual Power in 1917. Here's a very quick rundown, since the detailed history is outside of the scope of this video. After Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the Russian imperial throne in February of 1917, Russia found itself with two governments simultaneously proclaiming jurisdiction over the old Russian Empire's territory. On the one hand, there was the Provisional Government, which proclaimed the founding of the Russian Republic. This faction, informally known as the Whites, was made up of both liberals and conservatives. Some of them wanted the monarchy back, while others wanted the new Russian Republic to be a liberal one, like France. On the other hand was the Petrograd Soviet, which proclaimed the founding of a socialist state. This faction, informally known as the Reds, was made up primarily of socialists and anarchists. Some of them wanted a formal state socialist model, while others wanted to dissolve the government entirely and live in a stateless communism. This is known as the dual power period, which lasted until the October 1917 revolution, when the Petrograd Soviet finally gained the upper hand over the Russian Republic, turning what was a cold civil war into a hot one between the Red and White armies. However, during that cold civil war period, both governments held elections and convened to pass laws in the same building, the Tauride Palace in St. Petersburg. Even though these were technically two sovereign governments occupying the same space, they didn't actually make any direct moves against each other, despite the existence of each one threatening the sovereignty of the other, because neither was actually powerful enough at that moment to exercise total control over the territories they claimed, and neither was ready for war yet. It was probably pretty awkward when they passed each other in the halls. During the dual power period, the Reds spent most of their time making inroads at the local level, establishing local Soviets, and bringing in local people to be members of the party, while the Whites spent most of their time governing the country from the top down, and trying to make progress using the old institutions of state. It was Lenin's view, and he was ultimately correct on this, that when the bourgeois state had been extremely weakened, it was possible for a counter-insurgency to build up alternative institutions from the ground that would eventually grow to replace the existing institutions, and that this work was necessary for a revolution to be successful, as the functions of the old institutions could be easily transferred over to the replacements, minimizing the chaos of the transitionary period. Socialism in the modern day also seeks to build dual power institutions, or to build a society in parallel to the currently existing one, which brings us back to Matteo Bergamini and the Left Parallel Society. If you watch any breadtubers, the modern day socialist content creators, you'll find that they talk a lot about building a side economy to the main one.
The best way to effectively seize control of a government as a leftist is through building dual power. We all know dual power, right?
Where, say, worker co-ops replace private businesses, credit unions replace banks, local clubs and councils do the job of replacing formal local governments, unions represent workers and ultimately seek to replace management. This faction of socialism is known as mutualism, where local communities build independent structures and activities outside of the influence of the bourgeois capitalist state. And because of the ideological bridge between left and right anarchism, which I've talked about in many videos now so you should know what I'm getting at, there's also a lot of right-wing anti-state movements doing the exact same thing. Every time those guys reject governments and corporations in the supply chain by, say, buying locally sourced products from like the Amish or whatever, or living off the grid or farming their own food, they're ultimately doing the same kind of activism as dual power. Those guys are building a separate society for themselves that survives and thrives without state involvement. Once again, I'm not making a claim on whether or not any of this stuff is good or bad. It simply looks like the 18-year-old Bergamini was interested in these activities. Now, before you start saying that this proves he's some sort of communist infiltrator looking to destabilize the West, and Shoutout UK is actually a secret project meant to turn the British youth into revolutionaries, well, maybe, but remember, Bergamini isn't 18 anymore, he's 33. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a small business owner, and although his politics nowadays are pretty progressive, based on all of those podcasts and talks and shit that I listen to, it's pretty clear to me that he's moved away from a lot of his old revolutionary ideas. Personally, I don't necessarily begrudge anybody for having a phase in their life where they were a teenage retard believing in some stupid fucking shit, thinking they had the entire world figured out. It happens to a lot of people, and most of them grow out of it.
Grow up, Simon. You grow up.
In fact, his initial conceit of wanting the original Shoutout UK to be a de-radicalizing element might actually be because at some point he got de-radicalized away himself from nonsense like the Left Parallel Society, and he wants to pay that forward. Fair enough. However, even if we give Bergamini the maximum benefit of the doubt, even if we believe that he's no longer a communist revolutionary and he does simply want to help de-radicalize people, the Pathways drama has showed that he's utterly failed at that job. And it's not just Pathways. Perhaps owing to his past as a far-left radical, Bergamini's work consistently shows that he and his organization just do not understand the far right. For example, here's a video from their channel, aptly named, Don't Get Manipulated by the Far Right. Let's see what kind of advice they've got for us.
They cannot cope with diversity. So they create a racial hierarchy in which they are superior, based on facts that are entirely fake. They pretend science says having more melanin means being less evolved. It all sounds true if you don't know that their claims are empty lies.
You know, I've spoken to many different types of far-right people, ethnonats, monarchists, anarcho-capitalists, legitimate fascists, neo-reactionaries, and many different flavors of racist. And never have I once heard the claim that more melanin is a direct sign of less evolution. That's gotta be some, like, old-style racism from the American slavery period or some shit. Most of the content on the Shoutout UK channel appears to be uploads of advertisements that they probably run elsewhere. You know what I mean, like a 30-second PSA saying, don't listen to disinformation, or register to vote, or whatever. Stuff that's not really objectionable. But whenever they do actually upload one of their video workshops, it's almost always pure cringe like that last one. And over time, they've shifted away from doing youth interviews or street interviews, and more towards these cartoon videos. All of them done in that same corporate Memphis style that the Pathways game was, of course. And when people actually do appear on camera nowadays, well, these aren't exactly teens anymore. They're not like ancient fossils or anything, but how do I put this? At this point, Shoutout UK has existed for like 15 years. It's no longer the new on-campus student blog of 2011, or the hot youth activist startup of 2014. Despite their tagline, they're not actually the voice of the next generation anymore. The generation after Bergamini's is now coming up, and they largely disagree with him because he's a woke millennial. He's become the uncool dad, the unk who's out of touch. I'm not blaming him for that. Happens to all of us eventually.
It'll happen to you.
But while Bergamini's initial goal of blanket de-radicalization was a noble one, over the years he and his operation have built up some significant problems. One, the fact that they no longer care about far-left radicalization, or Islamic radicalization, or other forms of radicalization, has severely damaged their nonpartisan cred. Two, despite their focus on far-right radicalization, they clearly don't actually understand the far-right at all. And three, like any other millennial-run activist organization in these spaces, Bergamini and his crew have had some scandals here and there. And these are the types of scandals that, if you're not politically captured, they're actually a lot easier to deal with, if you know what I mean. Oh, wait. No, hold on. There's no sex pest allegations here. If you're surprised, you're not the only one. Firstly, there's the obvious scandal. The Pathways game. The Amelia shit we've been talking about this whole time. After the game and the waifu went viral, Bergamini did the rounds on mainstream media, where he said pretty much the same thing in multiple interviews. That Amelia had been co-opted, and that the meme was the monetization of hate. Oh, that's where those LBC cucks got the line from. However, in his statement to The Guardian, Bergamini clarified that the game was actually developed using data from youth focus groups, and that feedback from both the schools and the intended audience was positive. This might be true, but I remember being a little shit myself. If I was a teenager and a teacher asked me if the Pathways game made me think twice about far-right radicalization, I would have said yes sir, not because it was true, but because I just wanted to get the fuck out of there and go play actual video games. Bergamini continues by saying, there's been a lot of misinformation, unfortunately. The game does not state, for example, that questioning mass migration is inherently wrong. This sounds like he's still trying to hold on to Shoutout UK's original purpose, to be a general anti-extremist group, rather than being partisan in one direction or another. But dude, if you intended for the game to not say that questioning mass migration is inherently wrong, you fucking failed. However, since the Pathways Amelia drama wasn't Shoutout UK's first time in the hot seat, let's quickly check out what else they've been up to. In the wake of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel, a lot of far-left pundits and groups came out in support of the attacks, due to their belief that Israel is a cornerstone of the colonialist, capitalist world order that must be toppled through violent revolution. Oftentimes, these more direct calls for revolution are couched in softer pro-Palestine language. And oftentimes, people who legitimately are just interested in the effects that Israel's counterattack is having on the civilians in Gaza have found themselves arm in arm with people who are more mask-on, and more extreme than they would have preferred.
I didn't sign up for this.
Shoutout UK announced they had been brought in by the Luton City Council to run their programs at Luton College. Luton was the site of some of the largest pro-Palestine protesting in the UK, and the college dissolved its student council during a wave of student protests after links between the college and Italian arms dealer Leonardo was made public. Leonardo is a major supplier of the Israeli military and also routinely attends job fairs across the UK. Now, the Luton City Council had contracted Shoutout UK to do their political literacy thing before the October 7th attack, all the way back in April of 2023, according to Bergamini. However, he and his organization were caught between a rock and a hard place, the same one that many left-wingers found themselves in the wake of October 7th. A Guardian article linked the timing of Shoutout UK's de-radicalization program to the Gaza protests, implying that the school was deploying Bergamini's operation in an attempt to propagandize the students into supporting Israel or something. As a result of this, Shoutout UK was briefly on the online British left's cancel list, and Bergamini requested, and received, an edit in the article clarifying the situation. Far-left radicalization, specifically on the Israel-Palestine conflict, is fucking unhinged, and has similar rhetoric and violent potential as far-right radicalization. Despite this, de-radicalization experts like Bergamini found themselves entirely unable to actually take a strong stance on it. This was a common problem that a lot of lefties who, had actual careers on the line and weren't just students or Twitter shitposters, found themselves facing back in 2023, because Islamic radicalization is a well-known blind spot for progressive activists.
What an odd thing to say.
This fact often confuses people who are newer to politics. It makes sense for, say, a right-wing partisan to be dismissive or downplaying, or even accepting of right-wing radicalization, while viewing left-wing radicalization as an imminent threat that must be stopped, and of course the other way around. Left-wingers turning a blind eye to left-wing radicalization while focusing on the right. This kind of one-sidedness is bad, obviously, but it's understandable. However, Islamic radicalization is nominally right-wing. To be more precise, it's the right wing of a foreign culture and society. And in the mind of a progressive radical who values multiculturalism even to the point of possible cultural suicide, the fact that radical Islam is foreign takes priority over the fact that it's right-wing. The tendency for progressives to fetishize the foreign is a long-documented phenomenon on both my channel and others. We don't need to retread that ground today. You know what I'm talking about. However, to round this out, let's briefly revisit the Telegraph article that kicked the Pathways story off. Do you recall all the way back at the start of the video when I mentioned that the city councils of East Yorkshire and Hull placed the order for the Pathways game back in 2023 in order to combat right-wing extremism among the youth? Well, the article says that they did that because a year earlier, in 2022, these city councils were receiving large numbers of migrants into local hotels by the Home Office. A year later, in 2024, Hull became one of multiple sites of widespread protests against migrant hotels, where the UK government was spending taxpayer money to rent out private hotels and house migrants there. These protests kicked off after Axel Rudikabana, who wasn't actually a migrant staying at the hotel, but was the son of immigrants, stabbed and killed 3 girls at a daycare. It came out that Rudikabana was actually referred to the PREVENT program for risk of radicalization 3 times before his attack, but he was consistently rejected because he didn't present an ideological underpinning for his desire to do violence. As for why he did it, well, investigations into his record and his home life showed he was a loner, he was bullied at school, and he had expressed desires to kill people as far back as 12 years old. The right-wing narrative surrounding this event ranged from blaming the false fact that he was a migrant, he wasn't, to the true fact that he was descended from immigrants, to falsely blaming Islam, even though the investigation specifically ruled out an ideological motive. Obviously, none of this is Shoutout UK's fault. I'm not bringing this story up to somehow link the Pathways game back to this event, but rather I'm pointing out that the PREVENT program, which Pathways presents in a very positive light, is not actually doing a good job, and that one of the city councils that commissioned the game in the first place appears to probably have done so because, well, they've got a lot of problems with migrants right now. In fact, here's my personal schizo conspiracy theory. I think everyone who talked about the Pathways story got it wrong. It wasn't made to propagandize the youth into being pro-migration. I actually think it was made to make the PREVENT program look better than it is. Because in terms of both functionality and public approval, it needs all the help it can get. In the wake of the Rudikabana stabbings, Prime Minister Keir Starmer began an overhaul of the UK's terrorism laws to include non-ideological violence, and also began a review of the effectiveness of the PREVENT program. To get us back on topic, the Luton College controversy isn't the only thing that's been nipping at Bergamini's heels. I'm sure you've heard of these extreme leftist content creators who preach about socialism while nonetheless being ruthless capitalists in their personal lives. You know, stuff like Hassan stealing content and failing to pay his editors, that sort of thing. Well, it turns out Bergamini might not actually be any different. Here's a very lengthy claim from the Twitter account All for Progress. Let's see what he's got to say. For those of you who don't know about Pathways yet, have I got a treat for you. It's a British state-funded computer game built to warn teenagers that they may be referred to a counter-terrorism program. Okay, we already know this. Let's skip ahead to the new stuff. I have a particularly ironic relationship to this game, given 2 facts in particular. One, that I used to work for Shoutout UK. Well, work. In 2015, seeking internships, I did a load of unpaid labor for them as a youth journalist. Curious, it's always the agonizingly right-on organizations who are the most keen to get work out of youngsters without paying them. Now, this guy provides no proof of this claim, but it is somewhat plausible to be honest. Lots of startups utilize voluntary labor, both honestly and duplicitously. 2, it was my organization, Progress, that was responsible for Nixim, the game which Pathways so obviously plagiarizes, and which stands out as the complete antithesis of what Pathways is and what it believes. It is far from surprising to me that Shoutout should find itself on the side of history that hates and legislates against truth, and that wishes to destroy people's freedom to question things and criticize illegitimate policy freely on chosen grounds. Even when I was there, they were sponsoring ridiculous anonymous type struggle shorts made by filmmakers who address their audience directly as comrades and have now gone on to higher things. This also sounds like he's confirming my left parallel society hypothesis regarding Bergamini's former comrades. I want to believe, guys. It's not surprising to me that Pathways was lifted from Nixim, which it copies to a T. The meter, the variable outcomes, the notion of a moral journey, the very idea of Pathways itself, with such a lack of imagination. Because they despise people thinking for themselves or vying for any standard of personal excellence, and because they believe what's yours is mine, they tend to have little excellence or independent talent in their ranks and copy things without shame. But myself? I'm quite glad to see it. The comparison makes the moral charge, the humanism, and yes, even that, the compassion of Nixim, shine all the brighter. I don't want to censor this miscreation from you. I want you to play them both. I want you to feel the difference. Well, okay. This guy's core claim is that Shoutout UK's Pathways game is a blatant ripoff of his anti-radicalization game, Nixim. Of course, we've got to check it out, right? This is Nixim, available for anyone to play over at nixsimulator.com. A single playthrough of the game will take you about 5 minutes, meaning that if you want to experience it for yourself, you can absolutely hop over right now and check it out. But I'll still give you the rundown, because if we're going into autistic detail, we might as well go all the way. As you can see, this is a text-based game. There's no graphics here, just clickable buttons. The game's premise is laid out straightforwardly. Welcome to the life of Nick, 30 years old. You and your girlfriend want to settle down and start a family. You need to save £100,000 for a house deposit within 5 years. Good luck. Well, that's pretty easy to understand. You start the game with £14,000 in your savings account, while your girlfriend has $6,000 in the bank. In total, you're around 20% of the way towards your goal of $100K. You've also got $45,000 in student loan debt to manage. The news ticker at the top of the screen doesn't really influence gameplay, as far as I can tell. I often found myself thinking that maybe it hints at upcoming events as you play through the game, but I could never confirm that. The messages that appear are pretty funny though, like NHS waiting list now longer than patient's remaining lifespan, and a government promises new ambitious plan to reveal groundbreaking plans for change. This sort of thing actually pretty effectively sells the feeling of an inefficient, uncaring bureaucracy grinding down the average person. So, here's how the game is played. Every time you encounter an event, 3 months pass. That means between 30 and 35, you'll encounter roughly 20 events. And based on your choices, you get a different ending at the end of the 5 years. Here's how my first playthrough went. Right off the bat, my girlfriend wanted to start a side hustle selling candles on Etsy. Getting it going cost us £200, and returned no rewards other than her gooping up the house full of wax. Thanks, Naomi.
What the fuck?
Next, I found a cheap apartment closer to work. The one catch is, we have to make 3 times the annual rent. It's here that I noticed the game keeps a running tally of your monthly expenses and incomes if you scroll down, in order to really hammer home what it feels like to be bailing water out of a sinking ship. Anyway, I asked my parents to co-sign with me, but they don't make enough money for it to matter, and we lose the apartment. Then those very same parents come for a visit, and I pay for dinner. As a reward for standing on my own 2 feet, they give me £2,000, awesome. By the way, if you choose to have them pay, you get nothing, despite the poorer Nick obviously needing the money more. Next up, I get a free lunch at work. The game has a few filler events like this, where there's no choices made and no benefits or losses incurred. Their only purpose is to inject a bit of dry humor and remind you that time is marching on, even if you're not actually doing anything with that time. Speaking of time marching on, year 2 begins with us discovering a 21-year-old TikToker buying a house. It turns out the only reason they could afford it is because their parents are rich. Then our apartment is sold and the new landlord jacks up the rent, in before the Maoists show up. Next up, there's a fight on the subway, which I obviously choose to record and upload to social media. My account gets quickly monetized, and I earn £20. Wow, this really is true to the life of being a content creator. After my taxes go up, when the government announces they have to pay for some fraud nonsense, I'm then given a job offer, which I'm ultimately rejected for. What a way to start year 3. Then my landlord replaces my gas heater with an electric one, due to new government regulations, which increases my rent again, but as luck would have it, I discover a niche AI tool to help me automate my job. You'd think that this would allow me to be more productive, maybe try to climb the corporate ladder or work on a side hustle, but in actuality, I just waste more time at work. Once again, very true to life. Year 4 sees a rate cut from the Bank of England, lowering the minimum monthly payment on my student loans. I could use those savings to go on a trip with my friends, but I ultimately decide not to, because at this point I've saved over £50,000 and, wait a minute, the house price also went up. Yeah, so some of these options also lead to the goal getting farther away over time, not just your savings dwindling down. And one of those events happened right after the trip. A housing boom adds another $10K to the price tag.
Year 5 begins with a BBC job offer. However, it turns out the listing was posted in error. I'm still not getting the £100 application fee back though. Then inflation increases the student loan payment, and my parents let me know I can move back home if I need to, but I decline. And then there's probably the goofiest event I've seen in the game. The Chancellor declares he will ban landlords from being too mean. As punishment, your landlord raises your rent by £200. I feel like I'm drawing Monopoly cards here. And then the game ends. I've run out of time. The years have flown by. Despite my best efforts, it just wasn't enough. I'm still renting and life goes on. I managed to save £64,000 out of the £120,000 necessary. Since I began with £20,000, that means over 5 years, I managed to save up an additional £40,000, while the goal also moved £20,000 out of reach, meaning I really only saved up 20. Which means if things stay the course, it'll take me around 20 years of work to afford the down payment on the house. Man, that realization evoked more feelings than anything the Pathways game ever managed to stir up, besides laughter, obviously. Nick Sim is an extremely simplistic game due to its text-based nature, but its ability to deliver its theme is so far beyond Pathways, it's not even funny. As you click through the game, it's constantly blindsiding you with bullshit fees, mishaps, setbacks, some of which probably feel kind of familiar to a lot of people. It does a really good job of hammering home the feeling of pushing a boulder up a hill and making some progress, but it's so little progress for so much effort that it seems hopeless to even try. The fact that the game's progress is laid out like a household budget that slowly sinks more and more into the red also helps sell the feeling of desperately trying to keep your head above water. I ran through the game a bunch more times just to see what else it had to offer, and it turns out the 20 selections you get are randomly generated. Some of them do nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
Like Respect the Hijab week at work. Whether you choose to talk to your Muslim colleague about it or not, nothing actually changes. Your money pile isn't affected, there's no backlash at work or anything. It's just some funny writing. Other events are very clearly trying to make a political statement, like the mayor of London stating that knife crime will be addressed with poetry workshops. And some events do the opposite of what you think, a la the parents going to dinner event. For example, when your boss offers to send you to France for a conference, you'd think that accepting it means you're on the fast track for a promotion, but no. If you choose to go, you're forced to spend a bunch of money while you're there, and if you don't go, you're spared the fee and nothing happens. Also, the game does a pretty good job of showing how a lot of the day-to-day choices are just insignificant in the grand scheme of things. For example, one event has you earn an extra £200 over the weekend at a festival, and that's not nothing, but it is a drop in the bucket compared to your goal. Another event has you join a YIMBY group, which has a membership fee of £200. Most of the choices you make in the game only add or subtract tiny amounts of money from your account. The big financial effects are usually out of your control, which also probably maps onto people's real life experiences pretty well. In fact, you're so out of control of your situation that sometimes the endings you get feel kind of arbitrary. For example, on my second playthrough, I got the Pyrrhic defeat ending. This time around, I was specifically money maxing every option I was given, including saving £15 in avocado toast, and I ended up with £89,000 out of 100,000. Dude, I'm in such a better position than I was in the first playthrough, it's not even funny. I'm almost there, but the game still frames this as a loss, because I'd end up buying the house at 36 instead of 35. In another playthrough, the game ended prematurely at 33, because I chose to move back home with my parents to save money. And whenever you make that choice, the game gives you 1 year to find an apartment again, or your girlfriend leaves you. You do end up saving some pretty good money this way, but you can only do it for a year or you get an auto game over. In another playthrough, I got my girlfriend pregnant, but we still couldn't afford a house. This time the game says the future is bright, but uncertain. For a while, I thought the game was coded to be just impossible to beat. But no, on my 10th try, I finally got the good ending. I could finally buy the house. Or, afford the down payment on the house. It turns out that winning Nick Sim is like 75% luck. If you get bad rolls and the house price going up, or the rent going up, or taxes going up, it's very easy to get fucked over. But if you get good rolls, like you avoid all the price raising events, and you get stuff like the girlfriend promotion event, where she doubles her income, then you're in the realm where your choices actually do matter. So, here's how you win. Tip 1. Avoid unnecessary expenses, like podcast equipment for the show you'll never make, because that'll help you nickel and dime your way forward. Yes, these are small expenses like I mentioned earlier, but if you're on one of those 25% of lucky runs, then these small things really do add up. Tip 2. If you're given the option to get your master's degree early in the game, take it, because while your debt does go up, your income also increases a fair bit too. This option isn't worth doing near the end of a run, so if the game gives it to you on year 4 or year 5, there's not enough time left in the game to see the benefit of it. Tip 3. If you're given the option to move back home, that's some good savings too, but again, only for 1 year. Choosing this one at the end of the game might be just enough to squeak you over the finish line. And finally, tip 4. If you're given the rare investing event, putting $20,000 into safer stocks can fetch you a decent bit of extra cash. But I'm going to be honest with you, my one winning run is the one where I YOLO'd 20k into Bitcoin and then pulled out when it hit 60k. In some other runs, I often got close to being able to afford a house while keeping my relationship intact, but I never quite got there. In the end, the only way I could buy a house is when I got a 40k profit on Bitcoin.
I won!
NICSIM, despite being quite different from Pathways, is actually able to deliver its message in a pretty smart way. The player actually does feel what it's like for the goal to be just slightly out of reach constantly. You do feel just how often random chance overrides any hard work you put in. And if you do finally win a run, you absolutely feel how arbitrary it all is. Plus, the writing is snappier. It has no problem portraying what it's like to be a corporate drone keeping his head down during woke office shenanigans, or how the arbitrary and contradictory actions of government often screws regular people over for no comprehensible reason. NICSIM has a message, and it does a pretty good job at transmitting it. Here's the problem though. That All for Progress guy who made NICSIM, he claimed that Pathways is obviously plagiarizing his work. And frankly, I just don't see it. He said that Pathways copies NICSIM to a T. The meter, the variable outcomes, the notion of a moral journey. Bro, you're just describing video games at this point. If your point is, NICSIM has choices, Pathways has choices, clearly Pathways stole from NICSIM, you're fucking retarded. Personally, I don't buy this story that Pathways copied NICSIM. I do not see enough similarity between these two games for that to make any sense at all. What's probably actually happening here is that this dude did do some work for Shoutout UK in the past. He probably actually is a former disgruntled intern or something, and he saw an opportunity to shit on his old associates because they're now going viral. Also, he fell for the whole Pathways was taken down out of embarrassment narrative too. I guess you can't be smart and media critical all the time, pal. Anyway, I just realized that we're now past the Matteo Bergamini section of the video. And since we're not really going back to him, let's just quickly give him a final send-off. If I had to choose one word to describe Bergamini and his work, it would be ignorant. Personally, I think the chance that he's trying to create communist sleeper cells or whatever is probably pretty low. In the end, he's just a bog-standard progressive, with all the problems that entails. His life's work is devoted to critiquing a right wing that he doesn't actually seem to understand. And the sort of foot-in-mouth moment that Pathways represents was basically inevitable for him. This is what happens when you talk about stuff that you know absolutely nothing about, and you're given a large platform to do so. Sooner or later, you eventually end up exposing your ass. What makes the NICSIM game kinda interesting is that the name is taken from a French meme called The Social Contract, which obviously comes from Rousseau, but is a very watered-down version of his ideas. The original form of the meme shows a guy named Nick, 30 years old, wearing business attire and looking stressed. The green arrows represent money taken from Nick in the form of taxes. The French state is giving that money to an immigrant named Karim, who's 25, who then sends it to Africa, and to boomers named Bernard and Chantel, who are both 70, who instead give it to luxury cruise liners. The meme illustrates the redistribution of tax dollars from the more productive class of French society to the less productive, though in a highly simplistic way. The meme was remade in German, Dutch, and yes, English. This meme isn't really that popular on the North American internet, despite there being an American version too, but it's everywhere among the European right. Each of these versions changes bits and pieces, but they all capture the same basic spirit. The 30-year-old Nick has his tax dollars given to immigrants and olds, flowing through various bureaucracies and social programs. As a result, the phrase Nick 30 has become a catch-all term among the European right wing to describe how tax-heavy European countries have imposed an impossible burden on its productive class to pay for ever-expanding social programs and refugees and all sorts of other left-wing projects. Hell, even that Bovril G guy who kicked off the entire Amelia discourse occasionally uses it too, which is the perfect segue into the final leg of this video. I know this one's been pretty long. I hope you haven't been holding your piss this whole time. Let's finally talk about what is at the heart of the Amelia craze. We've already discussed how the Pathways game was intended to be progressive propaganda, and how Shoutout UK utterly failed at that goal. However, it's important to notice that just because one side, the so-called cringe side, was making propaganda, that doesn't mean that their opponents, the so-called based and red-pilled side, aren't also propagandists as well. All of the right-wing Amelia posting that I've been showing you throughout this video is also a form of propaganda. It's not neutral or anything, it is specifically designed to reinforce the right-wing's worldview. It just turns out that this time the right was better at it.
When I saw this specific piece of Amelia AI art, where she's hanging out with Vivian James, the Gamergate mascot, it reminded me of how much things have changed. The original calling card of Vivian James was, "Can we just play some video games?" It was a desire to keep real-world political activism out of the gaming space. Just leave us alone and let us play video games. Don't demand that we're politically engaged all the time. Let us have our private spaces, free of real-world politics, where we can enjoy some downtime. And you know what? A lot of people still feel this way. This doesn't mean that games can't have political stories. It simply means that we want the option to turn our brains off and simply go along with the ride sometimes. I think everyone needs some space to just relax and not have to worry about anything every once in a while. Shh. Let people enjoy things. Anyway, that was the desire of a lot of pro-Gamergate people back in 2014, and a lot of the Vivian James artwork of that time accurately represented those feelings. But Amelia represents something different. Amelia is explicitly political, but it's right-wing politics she promotes, not left-wing politics. These two characters are not actually aligned. The values behind the Amelia character isn't some call for a depoliticized space, a la the Vivian position. Amelia is explicitly a political character in ways that Vivian isn't, and in ways that a lot of the 2014 era Gamergaters would outright reject. Putting them together because they're both nominally anti-left or anti-woke doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense. This is the same type of problem that I described back in my Goonergate video, where right-wing infighting between the libertarian types and the woke right types first started kicking off. In fact, despite the differences in the values that underpin both Amelia and Vivian, I have noticed a similar development between how the two characters are presented by their fans. Let me show you what I mean. Now that the Pathways drama has come and gone, Amelia posting is kinda slowing down, though there are still new Amelias popping up daily on social media. But those people who are still hanging on to this topic, they seem to be getting pretty weird about it. Like, check this out. Amelia's become a global icon of the resistance. Bro, my AI girlfriend has become a global icon of the resistance might be the saddest political statement that I've ever fucking seen. The Amelia thing is funny, sure, but you know she's not real, right? You know you should get an actual girlfriend, right? You're not just gonna lock yourself away on your PC all day and endlessly circle jerk about a fake girl, right? The problem here is similar to the Vivian one from back in 2014. People became so wrapped up in this representation of their values that they've created that they're kind of starting to miss the whole point of what they originally set out to do. Let's tune back into Smash JT one last time, so I can show you what I mean. He dropped a video called "Amelia Pushes Keir Starmer to the Brink of Resignation." No, she didn't, dude, and we both know it.
There are rumors that Keir Starmer may be stepping down out of Parliament, and a lot of people are wondering if it has anything to do with the viral Amelia clips that have been taking over the internet.
Who are the people thinking that Amelia caused this? Short bus riders? As he continues on, he's just covering Amelia memes, which is all well and good, there's funny stuff in here. But why pretend like this has any real political significance, man? Here's the bit where he talks about real politics and, well...
Keir Starmer is finished. He admits he knew Peter Mandelson was friends with Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction. That's insane, by the way. Be very focused on Keir Starmer's hands and how they're shaking right now, because he is scared shitless because he knows he's busted right now.
Yes, it did. As a result, various questions were put to him.
Starmer engulfed in leadership speculation as he backtracks over Mandelson papers.
Okay, that's pretty funny, watching Starmer squirm and all. After this section, Smash keeps covering the UK news, which is his prerogative, but none of this has anything to do with Amelia. Despite that, here's how he ends the video.
But I can't help but think, all because of gaming, Pathways, and Amelia, did people start finally waking up to this? And the timing, coincidentally, with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff and the Mandelson stuff, all happening, coming to a head right now, can't help but think that Amelia is playing some role in having the pressure come down on the leadership in the UK.
Nobody with their head on straight actually thinks this. What are you doing, man?
Okay.
In fact, I've now watched a lot of anti-woke content talking about Amelia, from both large and small channels, and they're all acting like that Will guy from earlier in the video. Like posting the memes will somehow topple the UK government, or destroy the globalists, or that all of Keir Starmer's current political troubles are due to Amelia posting on Twitter. This is all giga-retarded, guys. You know there's real political events happening right now. Not just the Epstein Files stuff, but also the Chagos Islands thing, the Iran war's kicking off, the grooming gang inquiries are continuing. Like, there's real political developments happening in the UK right now. Do you guys really think it's AI Amelia slop causing the government problems right now? If so, maybe you have an overinflated sense of your own importance. The reason that I contrasted Amelia with Vivian is not solely because Amelia is political in ways that Vivian isn't. It's also because Amelia is propaganda in ways that Vivian isn't. And I don't mean pro-lefty propaganda from Shoutout UK. These anti-woke guys are both the consumers and the proliferators of Amelia propaganda. But honestly, they're not really a problem. They're mostly just joking around and having fun. However, there are some larger or more explicitly political UK accounts online that have no problem using Amelia as propaganda for their own views. Do you recall that Guardian article that claimed that the right wing had subverted her? Or the LBC clip that claimed Amelia had been taken over? These are ultimately wrong statements, because as we've seen already, Amelia does accurately represent right-wing politics. She didn't have to be subverted by the right and transformed into something she's not. However, that doesn't mean that these larger political accounts posting Amelia memes are just doing it for the lulz, or that they somehow have your best interest at heart. Here's a great example of what I mean. Connor Tomlinson, who is, in my opinion, a political technologist for the UK reactionary scene, who used to work for Sargon's Lotus Eaters outfit until he seemingly became too right-wing even for them, had this to say about Amelia. You can get the good ending and an Amelia of your own, Anon. All we have to do is send back people with no right to be here, who take our taxes, commit crimes, and replace our culture back home. Really, bro? Your solution to the male loneliness epidemic, which is a real problem by the way, is to tell young men that they can have the wife and job and family they've always wanted, if only they deport all the migrants? I hope you guys can see how fucking sleazy this is. Yes, immigration can cause some economic problems. Wages can go down. Supply of housing can run dry, though these effects can also be mitigated by good policy. I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up your ass about how immigration has no negative side effects. That's obviously fucking stupid. But I'm also not going to sit here and blow smoke up your ass about how the only reason you can't get a girlfriend is because migrants came in and not only took your job, but they took your GF too. Haha, brought it back for one more. That is fucking retarded, dude. The male loneliness epidemic is a multifaceted problem. Some of the economic components of the problem can probably be attributed, in part due to downstream effects of migration, so fair enough. But no, you're not gonna get your own fucking Amelia if you send the Muslims back home. And Connor is tipping his hand a little bit here when he makes this promise. What he's actually doing is taking advantage of a trending meme and a real problem to promote his own political project. It's disgusting when leftoids do it, and it's disgusting when rightoids do it. I hate all of these fucking people. In any case, this is an example of how Amelia has become propaganda for the right. Not because she's been subverted, no, she was always right-wing, but because right-wing accounts are doing a sort of mask-on simping for the character, saying shit like, "Revolution for Amelia," or "Amelia is what they took from you," without ever actually identifying who they is, of course. What's going on here is that these people's political energies are being redirected onto the Amelia character, and that has several effects. One, Amelia posting isn't real activism. Lots of people have been running around saying, if you want to save the West, do your part. Click the links, watch the videos, buy the Amelia coin. But none of this is actually doing anything. It's all just culture war slop. Two, Amelia isn't a real person. Most real-life dyed-hair art hoes would not express the opinions Amelia does. That is part of her novelty, sure, it's what made her popular, but it also shows that a lot of the guys doing the Amelia posting want a relationship that they probably can't ever actually get, no matter what Connor tells you. And that brings us back to Vivian. As Gamergate carried on back in 2014, the same thing happened to the Vivian character. She transformed into the avatar of the most unrealistic of the Gamergate opinions, and she became the object of desire for lonely male Gamergaters who, frankly, would not be able to pull a Vivian in real life. At least not without going through a significant amount of self-improvement, which most of them weren't willing to do. It turns out, at least part of the male loneliness epidemic can actually be chalked up to men's own follies, and the tendency to unironically prefer a waifu over a real woman is one of them. In fact, that's how this whole drama got started in the fucking first place. No, really. Let's go all the way back to the beginning.
It's rewind time.
I've flashed Bovril G's initial tweet that kicked this whole story off on screen multiple times now, but let's actually read it. Choker, Purple Bob, forthright patriotic views. Looks like the stable has its first 2D member. I have no idea how its existing 3D pig disgusting membership will compete. And yes, it's from here that the story blew up. Everyone started Amelia posting. Bovril G himself made a ton of Amelia posts. But while working on this video, I've had a nagging question that's kept reappearing in my head over and over. No matter how my research into the story advanced, nothing was answering that initial question. It just wouldn't leave me alone, no matter how hard I tried to put it out of my mind. What the fuck is the stable?
This dude is clearly referencing something. It's in caps after all. And yet, nothing in the Pathways story ever actually led back to this point. Searching his Twitter account shows that this guy references this stable often, generally talking about the things that he's doing with women or to women or whatever. So, I decided to just straight up ask him. Why not? It is Twitter after all. Might as well shoot your shot. And guess what? He replied. The answer is painfully obvious, by the way. I figured it was something like this, but it's nice to get confirmation. For the avoidance of doubt, the inner core of the stable, a half dozen or so London-based e-girls I'm good IRL friends with at this point. The rest of the stable. Any similarly delightful e-girls that I'm sure I'll get to know personally soon. Okay, the language that he and some of his followers use, the fetish content this guy posts, it all paints this picture of this dude keeping these e-girls locked up in his basement where he engages in hopefully consensual BDSM activities with them, like the stable's his personal harem of pain sluts or some shit. And okay, there's a non-zero chance that's true, but personally, I think it's probably pretty unlikely. Is he actually friends with some London-based e-girls? Maybe. Are they a part of his stable in the way that we're all thinking? Probably not. That is likely just his delusional fantasy. And the reason I think so is because of his desire to add Amelia, a non-existent woman, to the stable. It's kind of incredible that the origin point for this story, the true genesis of the whole Pathways shit show, is this terminally online dude who fancies himself a woman collector, but in actuality is probably just a fucking simp.
Simping isn't bad. Simping is king shit, okay?
Hell no. To the no, no, no.
The reason I say this is because he's a part of a very specific faction of the dissident right, one which I haven't really covered in depth on this channel before, and now is not the time. But these guys are not the puritanical, de-sexed religious conservatives, nor are they the wealth and status-seeking, highly competitive crypto tech bro right, nor are they the degenerate, Andrew Tate-esque caricature of masculinity red pill right, nor are they the mega cultist Trump dick sucks. Instead, Bulverl G is a part of the quasi-Evolan, highly spiritual, highly insane sex cult right, where they rigidly adhere to traditional gender roles, rooted in both sexual biology and pre-Christian morality. It's not equal, there's no modern idea of a partnership here, but it's very much a philosophy of men and women have dominant and subservient roles defined by nature, and individuals can only be happy if they adhere to that role, where those ideas are extended into the political realm. Now listen, I'm a liberal. You do whatever works for you, man. If this is the kind of sex you want to have in your private life, go for it. However, I'm not blind to the fact that most of the time, all of this shit just ends up being a coping mechanism for the fact that these guys have a lack of sexual success.
Don't you feel a little ashamed?
So, how much of this story is actually just a bunch of lonely, radicalized guys circle jerking and riling each other up? Because it's really looking like that's the main drive of it in the end. You know how there's that left-wing saying, let this radicalize you? And how sane people back in like the 2020 times accurately identified that mindset as really fucking dangerous? Well, guess what? The right wing's doing it too. And it's just as fucking bad. In the objective reality, outside of these people's partisanship, social problems are pretty complex. Personal problems are complex. This stuff cannot be solved by implementing one agenda or conquering one villain. If you happen to be a lonely incel type of guy watching this video right now, there's actually a lot of stuff you can do in your personal life to try and get a girlfriend that makes way more sense than kicking off a retarded race war. And if you're a person who was Amelia scrolling during the height of this meme, and you find yourself alone in bed at night thinking, oh man, I'd have an Amelia of my own beside me right now, if only we got rid of those immigrants, then my bro, you have fallen for the propaganda. It might not be the propaganda that Shoutout UK intended, but you got mind raped all the same.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
What's really at the core of the Amelia story is, frankly, loneliness and desperation. Now, some of these Amelia posters are just doing it for the lulz, and that's fine. I love me a good shitpost. But others are pretty clearly sad, lonely dudes who have basically been reduced to creating a simulacrum of their own values in female form, because the number of actual real-world women who think this way is vanishingly small. In fact, I'm using the term simulacrum to describe Amelia here for a specific reason. There's two philosophers that I want to briefly talk about, because their work will help us put a little bow on this whole story. Firstly, there's the French critical theorist Jean Baudrillard, who coined the term hyperreality in his most important book, Simulacra and Simulation. Baudrillard believed that society had replaced all reality and meaning with symbols and signs, and that the modern human experience was a simulation of reality. Society has become so saturated with social constructs that the concept of meaning itself had become meaningless, as everything had become infinitely mutable. He described this process in 4 stages. The first stage is when the symbol of a thing is a faithful copy of the real thing. The second stage is when the symbol has become a perverted copy of the real thing. People can recognize it's not accurate to reality, that it's obscuring what is actually being referenced. The third stage is when reality is absent, when the copy is pretending to be a faithful copy, but reality can no longer be seen underneath. The sign has become an arbitrary symbol with no relationship to the reality. And finally, the fourth stage is when the symbol is pure simulacrum. It has no relationship to any reality whatsoever, and it does not even need to pretend to be real anymore, because nobody actually has an expectation of it being real. Here's a pretty good low-stakes example of what Baudrillard's talking about. This is a floppy disk, or rather, a real photo of a real floppy disk. It's an accurate representation of a real object that exists, or did once exist, in the real world. The floppy disk began to be used as the save icon in a lot of PC games and applications starting in the early 1990s. And so it became common to see these cartoony, emoji-style floppy disks, where if you click on them, the application or the game will save your progress. These are not accurate representations of a floppy disk, they're cartoons, but we still recognize them as floppy disks because they look similar enough. And as the original floppy disk faded into history, the save symbol changed and became even more dissimilar from its original purpose. Nowadays, these symbols appear to be the shadows of things that once existed, and the average person in the youngest generation right now doesn't even know that these symbols actually once existed as physical objects. This is why you occasionally see this joke, posted by millennials or older, where they show a youngster a floppy disk, and the youngster replies with, "Hey, you 3D printed the save symbol," because the symbol has become fully divorced from its original reality, to the point that it's taken on a new hyper-reality as the save symbol. There's actually a bunch of Baudrillard memes floating around that are pretty funny, where the 4 stages are shown to progress in increasingly absurd ways. Like, for example, where stage 1 is a real fish, stage 2 is a cut of fish as a food, stage 3 is frozen fish shaped into the form of a fish, and stage 4 is Oreos with fish flavoring. Yes, that's real. Or where stage 1 is a cow, stage 2 is meat cooking on the grill, stage 3 is a hamburger sold in McDonald's, and stage 4 is hamburger flavored Doritos. These are pretty funny examples, but there is something to them. With each progression, the initial concept becomes more detached from reality, until it's no longer recognizable as authentic. Because Baudrillard is a critical theorist, he pointed out that the majority of these simulacra are created due to capitalism's ever-increasing technological development and productive capacity. After all, you can only really make hamburger-flavored Doritos after your civilization's achieved total mastery over food science, such that you now have the ability to transplant the taste of one food onto a completely different food. A lot of Baudrillard's work is influenced by a second French critical theorist named Guy Debord, who wrote the essay The Society of the Spectacle. His views are a lot like Baudrillard's, though he didn't develop them out into a 4-step process. Debord believed that modern human experience had been replaced with a commodified version of itself, where capitalism had degraded being into having and then having into appearing. An obvious example of this is the guy who lives a decidedly middle-class lifestyle, but nonetheless devotes a huge chunk of his income to owning, or even worse, renting, a ridiculously expensive car. He is projecting the appearance of wealth and status, without actually having that wealth, or being a member of that class. In Debord's view, who never actually gave a televised interview because he did not want to partake in the spectacle himself, modern capitalist consumption habits have obliterated both the past and the future. The past is obscured, appearing as a barbaric prehistory with no value whatsoever, while the future is compressed into an eternal present, where the next big thing, the next technological advancement, the next product, inevitably moves from the future into the present and is treated as if it was always there. In this way, the passage of time is completely obscured by consumption and repetition, where individuals exist in a never-ending singular moment of time. Of course, time doesn't actually stop. People do die eventually. But what Debord is identifying here is what we on the internet call the mindset of the consumer. The movie Bob caricature surrounded by Funko Pops, who allows months and years to slip by without ever actually doing something real with his life, because the symbols of reality keep him preoccupied enough to keep doing the same nonsense every day. He becomes ruled by the objects of consumption. Rather than his purchases serving his needs, he serves the needs of his purchases. Both of these ideas revolve around this sense of capitalist production advancing out of control, and the common person ultimately losing his ability to interface with reality as a result. Debord's ideas are a direct development of Marx's theory of alienation. Marx believed that capitalism forced workers into a state of estrangement, where their labor became a forced, dehumanizing activity rather than a creative outlet. Workers become detached from the products they make, as well as the entire productive process. And you know what? Fair enough. Anybody who's ever had to work a soul-crushing job knows how this feels.
Debord expanded on Marx's idea by observing that modern mass entertainment allowed workers to cope with the feelings of alienation that capitalism imposed on them. They can't find meaning in the real world, so they spend their time outside of work subsumed in false realities, in spectacles. Oftentimes, if only to psychologically prepare them for their return to work. And once again, anybody who's ever worked a wagey job knows this feeling. For Baudrillard, though, Debord's spectacle was not simply mass-produced escapism, meant to quell the revolutionary potential of the proletariat. Instead, modernity has become so inundated with spectacle that increasingly distorted representations of reality have begun to replace reality itself in a sort of hyper-reality, such that there is no way for anyone to understand or observe the real world without looking through these false lenses. Baudrillard called this the death of reality. This obviously doesn't mean that reality disappears, but rather, reality's authority to inform people of what is real becomes greatly reduced. The information mechanisms by which the ideology is spread becomes the hyper-reality that people view as real, and the actual reality becomes sidelined. There are many, many examples of this, and I'm sure you've already had a few pop into your head while I was talking. Ridiculous right-wingers who think that every single gay or trans person is grooming your children in the school system, or every single illegal is trafficking drugs or raping people, because that's all that accounts like libs of TikTok post about every single day. Or ridiculous left-wingers who think that a workers' revolution is inevitable, or everything is bigoted, or everyone's actually pro-Palestine or whatever, because all they do is watch Hassan Piker talk about these things 24/7. The hyper-reality constructed by these propagandists is not simply a spectacle for proletarian escapism from alienation, as Debord suggested, but it actually begins to rewrite the society in the minds of the escapees. Although this stuff comes from left-wing thinkers, the right-wing ultimately agrees with it in their own way. They haven't developed the idea with this level of sophistication, but they do have some intuitive sense of what's going on here. We all know the memes about the guy who lives in the pod and eats the bugs, and basically does nothing that's actually real with his life. That is how the right wing conceptualizes and memifies the same problem. And I do think that this lens of analysis is applicable here in the Amelia story. On some level, the Amelia posters are the bugmen, at least spiritually. But before we dive into that, I've got a bone to pick. This person is Dead Domain. They're a genderqueer lefty anarchist creator that I've spoken about on this channel before, back during the whole conservative core drama a few years ago. To be honest, I think I gave them a bit more flack than they deserved back then. Don't get me wrong, they're still ultimately wrong about that topic, and most other things they talk about too. However, they're not stupid. Their content sometimes has a pretty cool style, and they're clearly pretty smart. Unfortunately, when you start off with so many wrong priors, it doesn't actually matter how smart you are. You're always going to end up with a wrong conclusion. Anyway, Dead Domain did a video on nostalgia a few months ago that was actually not bad. However, there's this one section that I've wanted to find an excuse to talk about for a while now, and here it is.
Also, side note, do you ever think about why conservatives and liberals shake so much in their boots at the mere mention of Marxist philosophy, or any analysis that builds upon Marx and Engels' original work? Why might they not want you to think about the Society of the Spectacle or the Simulacrum? It's something to chew on.
Yeah, there's this view among smug leftists that liberals and conservatives don't actually read anything, that they're scared of doing so in fact, that if they touch a book penned by a communist, they'll burst into flames or something, as if the only thing differentiating the political center from the left is that leftists are more educated and they're not afraid of the truth. A few things to note here. One, I have in fact seen people exactly like this. James Lindsay's a great example. He literally does run around saying anybody who's read leftist political theory is a communist, whether or not they agree with that theory even in part. After all, that was the flashpoint of the whole Lindsay versus Sargon woke right debacle. 2. I am personally not like this. Look, I'm a liberal, and I'm talking about Debord and Baudrillard, and frankly, most other libs are actually readers too. For example, I've had people tell me that Kraut doesn't read because he's a lib, which is just fucking ridiculous. And 3, Dead Domain, and many others in their political camp, 100% treat fascist political theory the exact same way that they claim libs treat communist political theory. To them, if you've ever so much as placed a finger on Mein Kampf, you're an irredeemable Nazi. This way of thinking is frankly just anti-intellectual. You should actually read the fascists, for the same reasons you should read the communists, to discover how bad they are. However, with all this being said, here's a stream where Sargon, who in case you didn't know, is significantly to the right of me, is also talking about Baudrillard.
His theory of simulation and simulacra is a philosophical framework which describes how in modernity, and I guess what we can call post-modernity, the representations of reality that we see around us no longer actually describe or reflect or embody something about the real world, but instead act as a replacement for it, and they distort it, and this means that they precede any kind of change. And this means that the distinction between the real and the represented ends up kind of becoming obsolete or collapsing into itself, because, and this goes back to a much larger question of the nature of ideology. I spent a lot of time studying ideology for my master's, and so I think ideology is a field that is essentially entirely captured by Marxists as well, just to be clear, because most people have not really got that much interest in discussing ideology, and it's the Marxists who are trying to figure out why exactly they kept failing at the communist revolution. And so for the last 100 or so years, they've been engaged in a very high level and thorough examination of the nature of ideology. And so what Baudrillard is saying here, again, he's a radical leftist, obviously, but what Baudrillard is saying here is that the simulation, the ideology, the hyperreality can precede reality through the process of ideological reification.
Sargon's not even a liberal or a basic conservative anymore. He's a full-on English nativist and reactionary at this point. He has moved significantly more rightward since Gamergate in 2014. And yet, here he is, talking about post-Marxist critical theory intellectual writing. On the one hand, Dead Domain is completely ignorant of those people not aligned with them politically, to the point they think that libs are scared of Marx. On the other hand, Sargon's out here reading guys that a few years back, he called me a communist for daring to read. In other words, while Dead Domain is wrong about libs not reading, and they're certainly wrong about reactionaries not reading, seeing as Sargon is a reactionary, Sargon actually did the thing to me that Dead Domain claimed people like me did to others. Derisively call people a communist for reading left-wing philosophy.
Kids, you're both just awful.
There is more to this mini-segment than a dev grievance fest, though. Think back like 2 hours earlier in this video when we were checking out some anti-woke takes. Allow me to quickly refresh you on what Will of the Fan said back then.
Entertainment franchises hollowed out by ideological committees. Games redesigned to lecture rather than engage. Media that talks at audiences instead of trusting them. Celebrities that think we give a goddamn what they think about absolutely anything. Institutions that explain failure as moral resistance. This is what happens when socialism sheds its revolutionary aesthetics and puts on a lanyard. Modern technocratic socialism doesn't promise utopia. It promises management. A slow, polite decline explained with graphs. And the public is increasingly rejecting it. About bloody time. Not with manifestos, but with disengagement, mockery, and cultural sabotage. And here's the uncomfortable part. The future everyone warned you about? We're already living in it, baby. A generation raised by screens, attention fractured by design, identity outsourced to algorithms. Kids don't play games, they watch streamers play them. They don't build worlds, they consume dopamine loops. Skill is replaced by skeptical, mastery by monetization. And then the same institutions that engineered this environment now pretend to be shocked by the results. They warn about attention spans that they helped to destroy. They scold audiences they tried to disengage. And instead of correcting course, they double down.
Now that we understand a little of Debord and Baudrillard, it really sounds like what Will is observing here is a highly simplified version of what those guys wrote about. The reason that Will was ultimately wrong in that video isn't because the trends he's noticing aren't real. They obviously are. It's because he completely lacks the philosophical framework to understand those trends, which is why he defaults back to the assumption that everything bad in the world is done by his enemies, and that all of the people he considers his enemies are just this united monolithic block with no differences between them. And this is why I said earlier, you should read everyone, even if you disagree with them. Left-wingers are ultimately incorrect a fair bit, but it's not due to a lack of trying. I don't agree with what Debord or Baudrillard actually wanted to see done in the world politically, but their analysis of the current state of the world was spot on. To actually do what Dead Domain claimed that everyone does, in other words, to do what James Lindsay does, is to deny yourself knowledge simply because it comes from people you don't like. And that is how you end up like Will of the Fans, or frankly like a lot of the anti-woke crowd, grasping in the dark, lacking a true understanding of what is actually happening in the world. Okay, let's get back on track.
What Amelia actually is a simulacrum of a woman who has never actually existed in the first place. Right-wing anti-immigration sentiment, whether valid or not, was packaged into a fake woman, and then people began to direct their energies into servicing the fake rather than servicing the politics. Posting a based in epic Amelia meme won't change the government in the UK. It won't deport any illegal immigrants. The only thing that it will do is make other people a lot of money. Bergamini and his ilk might have been complete fucking retards for thinking that Pathways actually presented a convincing left-wing narrative, but they nonetheless stumbled into success. They reified the right wing into something harmless. Amelia is not going to be leading any revolution because Amelia isn't real. And becoming an Amelia poster is doing exactly what Debord said, coping with your inability to actually exist in the real world by building a fake world and living in that instead. It's even got a fake girlfriend too. The people who actually do want an Amelia of their own, as Connor said, are either going to have to look outside of the domain of right-wing politics or basically give up their desire, because girls who look like Amelia, girls who are Amelia, are overwhelmingly just not right-wing. And that is ultimately what made it kind of weird when the anti-woke crowd began worshipping goth GFs again after hating them for years, because there are no goth GFs out there. Not for them anyway. There's one last thing that's kind of related to all this that I want to quickly go over. I've seen multiple other YouTubers compare Amelia to Julia from 1984. Yeah, everyone loves going to that well nowadays. V even said it in that video from earlier.
I realize that it's genuinely, unironically, the story of the 1984 book. Like, you literally get to play as the main protagonist, and Amelia is Julia. The video game basically suggests that if you go online and you do research, and you look at stats and stuff like that, you get in trouble with the government. The video literally suggests that if you go to protest for nationalism or anything like that, you can get arrested. And the video game has you playing as a young man in a fascist dictatorship, you know, a place where the government looks at what you're doing on social media and spies on you at every single second. And ignorance is bliss. Like, in order to get a good rating for that video game, you literally have to avoid doing anything that a person with a critical mind would do. Just do not get involved into politics. Do not get upset over the fact that you don't have a job. Do not allow other women, in order to tell you to do fact-checking or read heretical literature. Do not post anything online. Do not accept videos from other people. And that's how you get to be a good person in British society.
You know, people occasionally ask me, Dev, why did you turn your back on the anti-woke brigade? The answer to that is the same as to why I never liked the breadtubers in the first place. Most of these people don't actually understand anything. They're just entirely vibes-based. Though it is kind of surprising that the right-wingers looped around to the leftist everything I don't like is fascism position, but here we are. Now, to give the devil his due, comparing Pathways and Amelia to 1984 and Julia is actually genius, but not for the reason that people like V thought.
Dumb people are always blissfully unaware of how dumb they really are.
Like Amelia, Julia disagreed with the dominant ideology of the state in 1984. When 1984's protagonist, Winston, initially encounters Julia, he hates her, at least in part for stirring up feelings of lust and love within him. Julia's public facade is that she's a member of the Anti-Sex League, a club which helps promote and normalize the state's anti-sex and anti-pleasure ideology among the people. But in reality, Julia is actually secretly quite fond of sex, and her and Winston eventually begin an affair, despite Julia being young and pretty, and Winston being old, missing teeth, he has warts and boils all over him. He's kind of a gross guy. Of course, the most famous parts of 1984 are regarding the totalitarian state, and Winston's eventual capture, torture, and re-education. Afterwards, by the end, Winston and Julia meet up again, and basically reveal to each other that they had been brainwashed so thoroughly they no longer love each other. In 1984, Julia represents a more immediate day-to-day survival, where small, unknown private victories are carved out against the regime, as opposed to Winston, who actually wants to be a proper revolutionary. Julia is more savvy than Winston, but ultimately has no long-term desire to actually change things politically in her society. She simply wants to keep getting away with skirting the rules and having a bit of fun where she can. She doesn't like the current situation, but she also doesn't really want to change it either. She wants to defy it for her own immediate ends, and that's pretty much where she stops. It's Winston who demands that she mold herself around his desires. It's Winston who forces her to get off on the fantasy of killing other women. It's Winston who forces her to be a revolutionary, even though she really doesn't want to. And it's Winston who pushes her into more extreme actions, which ultimately leads to both of them getting caught. These other creators have said that Amelia is like Julia because they're both young, attractive women who come into the life of a man who's been browbeaten by the system, and to him, she becomes the idealized avatar of revolution. And that's true. Both of these characters are actually this, though for Amelia it's obviously more simplistic. But that is where people like V ended their analysis. In actuality, Amelia is like Julia because Julia is ultimately self-serving and shallow. She's not actually a force for real political change. She represents a sort of vain, base pleasure-seeking that is ultimately self-destructive. For Amelia in the Pathways game, this character analysis doesn't map on at all. But for Amelia the meme, this actually maps one-to-one. And since at least some anti-wokies want to draw parallels, sure, let's actually do that. From Winston's point of view, Julia is a symbol of resistance, and that maps onto Amelia pretty straightforwardly. After all, from the point of view of a lot of guys in the UK right now, Amelia is also a symbol of resistance. But from Julia's point of view, what is Winston? What is herself? 1984 does actually answer these questions, at least kinda. Julia is ultimately shallow, treacherous, self-serving, and self-destructive. She betrays herself to Winston. She betrays Winston to the party. And there's even a few hints in the book that Julia isn't a real person at all. I mean, she's clearly a person in the story, but she has no personality, no soul. She's just the projection of the desires of others around her.
Double plus good.
Since we're mapping what Winston sees in Julia onto what the British right sees in Amelia, well, if we also map what Julia actually is onto Amelia, then Amelia is simply a simulacrum of resistance in the same way that Julia is. And even worse, if we map Winston's dysfunctional relationship with Julia onto how the right wing views Amelia, we actually see the same dysfunction. Amelia is a false projection of the British right wing's impotent desire to actually change society. Not because reform won't win the next election or whatever. I'm not saying anything like that. They might win. They might even succeed at deporting people. But rather, what the right wing wants, what it fantasizes about, the large-scale deportation of all migrants, both illegal and legal, will not actually return their country to some idyllic past. I'm not one of those progressive cucks who says that this never existed as some demoralization tactic. However, the immigrants didn't take this from you, and deporting them won't bring it back. It's technological advancement that changed how people live. And in order to actually return to that lifestyle, the UK would have to give up so much of its current quality of life that not even the people who think they want it would actually be able to do it. This is why right-wing populists, who promise to make things how they used to be, almost always turn their backs on that promise after winning an election. It's not because of the deep state or the Jews or the capitalists or whoever. It's because, just like the communists, the right's theoretical world does not actually map onto reality, and attempting to implement it only brings destruction. I'm not saying there isn't good criticisms of the current immigration paradigm. There obviously is. But the world the right wants to build will never actually come to pass, because the nostalgia they have for the past is largely colored by the fact that they were a kid back then, and the world seemed a lot better than it actually was, simply because everything was new and exciting. They didn't know how things worked. There was still magic in the air. I think this is ultimately why, despite my heavy criticism of the left, I can never truly be a rightist, because unlike them, I actually understand I can never be a child again, and the loss of my physical youth does not mean that some nefarious villain has stolen it from me. In practice, the right wing's worldview is just as utopian and delusional as any moneyless, stateless, classless communist pipe dream.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Anyway, it's for all of these reasons that I can only conclude that V, and the others like him, who positively compared Julia to Amelia, have never actually read 1984, or they just don't understand it. It turns out that guys like this, they just say what kinda sounds right in the surface, along with what their audiences expect to hear. But in reality, 99% of the time, they're just bullshitting. When I first decided to do a true deep dive into what makes the Amelia meme tick, well, I didn't think the video would be 3 hours long, first off, but more importantly, I didn't think I'd discovered the reason why I continue to disalign from the anti-woke crowd. But nonetheless, here we are. I really do think Amelia showed the cracks in the worldview of these people, even if they can't see it for themselves. I don't know, man, woke shit's annoying, don't get me wrong, but I think I'd rather live in the real world rather than the fantasy land of based and astroturfed memes, and the radical communist liberal left melting down over the next slop pile or whatever. The anti-woke brigade is kinda like the inverse of that soy boy who cried watching a Star Wars trailer. Rather than chasing the next high, they're chasing the next low, and it's just so tiring. The constant outrage, the fake wins against nobody. At this point, I'm over it. So, where does this all leave us?
Well, the Amelia posting is slowing down as the meme comes to the end of its life cycle, but possibly the most retarded variation of it is actually pretty recent. There's this one anti-woke guy named Jay Viper. I actually spoke about him during my Game Awards video, where he had this monumentally stupid take on Ghost of Yotai. And you know what? He hasn't gotten any smarter since then. He actually started up an AI slop video series called Amelia's House Rules. Here's the premise. Amelia and Charlie are now grown up, married with kids, living a Family Guy-esque suburban lifestyle, despite apparently being set in the UK, and the woke British state keeps interfering in their lives. Hijinks ensue. The whole thing is AI generated. They're 10-minute episodes featuring pretty bad AI cartoon clips stitched together. It's voiced by AI.
Next it'll be, you've exceeded your weekly carbon allocation, ma'am. No more Sunday roast for you!
It might even be written by AI. Either that or Jay's writing here just fucking sucks that badly. I get the appeal, you know. LOL, Amelia memes are funny. What if there was an Amelia TV show, dude? Well, I promise you, the novelty wears off after about 15 seconds. This is just anti-woke propaganda slop, in the exact same way that Pathways was woke propaganda slop. Jay does not truly understand what he's critiquing here, and all of the so-called comedy just falls flat because it's in service of his ideology. There are a couple of other minor Amelia stories too. For example, for a short time, other countries started to see Amelia likes pop up, which were basically shot for shot the exact same thing. For example, here's Maria, a German woman in traditional dress, doing basically the exact same thing as Amelia did for the UK. These Maria clips are actually word-for-word redos of popular Amelia clips. They've just set them in Germany instead. None of these alternates had any real staying power though. Also, for a while, people tried to tie another government propaganda game, this one coming out of Wales, to the same Amelia story, though this time around it was a VR game made by completely different people. It still sounds pretty cringe though, that's for sure.
This whole part of learning here feels like one of the longest modules. They have on this, at least only it seems, to be talking about black people's hair. I didn't find any other mention in their module about any other race.
No, I'm not going to play this one. Not because I don't want to, but because I just don't have access to it. As far as I can tell, it's not publicly available the same way that the Pathways game was. Plus, there's no way I'm splurging on a VR headset just for this shit. And it's a good thing, too. I don't think this video could contain a third game walkthrough. Probably the most important development, signaling the end of the Amelia meme's life cycle, is that real-life women have begun to don purple wigs and present themselves as Amelia to the viewer. Some of them are cosplayers, hoping to capitalize on that spectacle worshipping going on, while others are taking up Amelia as a protest symbol against immigration, kind of like how back in 2016 there were feminists wearing those pussy hats to their protests. But this stuff is honestly just kind of cringe.
It's over.
As funny as unwinding and investigating this whole story was, to be honest, it just kind of left me on a bit of a dour note at the end. The fact that so many people were willing to latch on to a fake woman as if she was real is a bit off-putting. Yes, I know, a lot of this is just going to be people fucking around and having fun, and that's totally fine. I love the jokes and memes myself. But as soon as I started seeing a couple of these guys seriously equate Amelia to Julia from 1984, that is when alarm bells started going off in my head. It's like we're back to the manic pixie dream girl discourse again, where these guys are inventing female savior damsels and heroic quests for them to go on, and then living in that false reality, because they cannot actually build a real life for themselves. Like, I know these guys drop Patrick Bateman memes constantly, because he's based in Red Pilled, and they are pretty funny, but all joking aside, nobody actually wants to be Patrick Bateman. Nobody thinks it's cool to spiral into Fantasyland, to live a life of total dysfunction and alienation. There is a real world out there, and though it's far from perfect, it's a lot better than the memes. And this is ultimately why, despite all the fun and games, I close off my deep dive into the Amelia meme with a slight aftertaste of disgust in my mouth. On the one hand, we've got left-wing propagandists who are completely stupid. They hold the people they seek to propagandize in utter contempt, and they have no fucking clue what they actually oppose. And on the other hand, yeah, we've got some shitposters and memesters and it's pretty funny, but at least a few of those guys, not all, but some, are actually radicalized lonely men with some very dark ideas that they can't actually say in polite society, who've been taken advantage of by grifters and revolutionaries. And worse yet, they know on some level that they're being taken advantage of, and they don't care. They are happy to offer themselves up as the fuel that burns everything down. And that is fucking terrifying. Alright, that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I know I'm like 2 months late on this story, but hey, if you want something to truly be examined, you just can't do it in a clickbaity, knee-jerk reaction video. That might be more financially successful for other people's channels, but it's also ultimately not true. And I don't want to be like the people I've criticized today. There's 1,000 anti-woke slop channels out there, all giving the same basic ideological take. There's 1,000 breadtube slop channels doing the same thing, and I'm just not that. At the same time, I also recognize that this type of content is actually not algorithmically popular. Not because I have the wrong opinions or anything, I'm not doing that cope, but because YouTube likes daily uploads, and this kind of video can't be a daily upload. So thank you very much to anybody who enjoyed the ride, who shared the video around the internet, and a special thanks to the names on screen who have chosen to help keep me afloat with your real money. I greatly appreciate it. Make sure you get into the Discord. And hey, if you liked this, maybe consider watching something else I've put out. It couldn't hurt. Anyway, I'm getting out of here. Have a good one. I love you.